Hello, welcome back to my fave fanfics. Here, I post, well, my favorite fanfictions, if that wasn't obvious. I do hope you'll enjoy them as much as I do. Please like and subscribe for more content. Without further ado, let's get started.
Welcome, my dear faves, to the second part of What If Gohan Ended Up in the World of My Hero Academia. Credit goes to Majin Gaiden 23 for this fantastic fanfic. Link is in the description for those who prefer to read or want to contact the author. Chapter 3. A Way Out. Son Gohan was fascinated by the quirks, powers possessed by 80% of the human population. The astonishing diversity of powers opened up a new world of knowledge for him. Some quirks were seemingly trivial, others flashy, and a few incredibly powerful. Inquisitive by nature, a trait he inherited from his mother, Gohan wanted to learn about all the different types of quirks. The most remarkable were the mutant types. Some people had horns or wings, for example, astonishing the young man. In his world, most people lacked powers, and only martial artists mastered ki, but they represented a tiny fraction of the population. Indeed, most people weren't even sure of ki's existence, thanks to that strange man, Hercules. But he wasn't here, none of the people who knew Gohan were here. A painful fact. A few days after his hospital admission, the medical staff asked about his power, and he honestly described it, despite initial confusion. He described his power as energy, enabling him to fly, shoot energy beams, and enhance his physical strength. This greatly impressed everyone, who called him lucky, which slightly hurt Gohan. He had worked hard to gain his strength and owed nothing to luck. He was born with great potential, but had trained for life or death battles since his earliest years, striving to be a worthy son to his father. He had accepted this as normal. But here, in this world, no child, regardless of potential, was forced to fight to protect those in need. They trained their quirks in schools for superheroes. To Gohan, the very idea seemed fanciful. Costumed vigilantes dispensing justice to criminals sounded like a child's dream. Yet here, it was the norm, and heroes were considered great people, respectable figures, even role models for new generations. Despite spending weeks in a boring hospital, the television proved to be a reliable source of information. He learned a lot about quirks and heroes from discussions with the doctor and Aizawa, especially during their outing 2 days ago. Gohan found it wonderful that people fought for the safety of the weaker, but also somewhat ridiculous that those acting to save lives without licenses were seen as vigilantes, no better than villains. The very thought was revolting to him. Anyone doing good deserved respect and friendship, especially when fighting monsters daily. In his world, his father and friends would have befriended anyone with a chivalrous soul. Here, apparently, one had to go through specialized schools, and while Gohan wasn't skeptical, he understood that heroes were all trained with the same rules and values. Molded the same way, and while generally a good thing, it was unfortunate that reliable and correct vigilantes were thrown into prison for doing good. Society was so focused on heroes that such events had occurred several times during Gohan's hospital stay. However, he understood the necessity of training heroes to a universal code, but lamented discarding those who didn't fit the exact mold. Being confined to his bed for so long, with nothing to do, Gohan had a lot of time to reflect on the society around him. Despite his young age, he had received the education of a prince. Often forgotten, he was the grandson of King Gyumao, and with his mother renouncing the throne, he would have been next in line. Although not a fan of monarchies, his grandfather was genuinely loved and respected. Thanks to his upbringing, Gohan was more intelligent and open-minded than other preteens his age. He was pursuing university-level education at just 10 years old, a few weeks before he had to fight Cell. This proved useful in sorting out the information about this society and its model. He found this world fascinating, and its prosperous peace suggested that this societal model was a good thing, yet he had some reservations. For now, he lived in this world, until he found a way to return home. If there is a way, a small voice in the back of his mind would sometimes whisper, bringing up painful but brutally true phrases. Gohan leaned out his window, watching the road traffic in the distance. Just another week and a half, and he would be released. He wasn't exactly a prisoner, he could leave easily if he wanted to, but he didn't know where to go. Piccolo had always told him to be cautious in unfamiliar environments, but not paranoid. He followed these guidelines religiously. His father would have told him to explore everything and befriend anyone deserving. His injuries were healing well, and his meal from 2 days ago had given him an energy boost and helped heal his wounds. His tail whipped the air behind him, moving freely when he was alone. When in the company of others, he forced himself to wrap it around his waist like a belt, which was incredibly complicated and slightly painful if he exerted too much force. Gohan was optimistic. Today, he might be able to go out with Aizawa, his doctor had said, but he was advised to remain cautious despite his good recovery. Gohan was happy to hear this. He found Aizawa to be pleasant, albeit a bit clumsy and grumpy, yet intelligent and, although he didn't show it, kind. The man had been intimidating at first, and Gohan had struggled to tell him his story, hiding much of the fight and its end, but he had still revealed the essentials. He had even confessed to killing Cell, yet the man didn't judge him harshly and seemed to want to befriend him. Gohan could sense energies, and if the emotions were strong enough, he could perceive them. This was especially precise and familiar if it involved someone he had affection for. This was particularly true for his father and mother. He could perfectly understand their states of mind. However, developing this ability was complex and time-consuming. Otherwise, all he could sense was the level of power, or in this world, something akin to a threat level. It was strange, but as people here didn't seem to have much, or any, key, he sensed their level of aggression or threat. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door, interrupting his thoughts. He wasn't too bothered, he constantly thought about the same subjects. Extending his senses, he scanned the surroundings and detected 2 nearby energies. One was Aizawa's, which he could identify more easily, having met him 3 times already, and another, quite energetic, which he didn't recognize. A smile crept onto his lips. He could leave this place and meet people. He quickly headed towards the door and swung it open with such force that it almost came off its hinges. The grumpy man noticed the sudden door opening and nearly stepped back in surprise. Gohan had once again failed to control his strength. He released the door handle, still trembling from the force. Maybe he should let others handle doors from now on. Sorry, he said quickly, with a slight smile. Behind Aizawa stood a man with an unusual appearance, dressed like a rock and roll fan. He wore a studded black leather jacket, pants, and belt of the same color. He smiled much more than Aizawa, emanating an excitement, an ardor that was noticeable. Hi. My name is Hisashi Yamada, and like Grumpy here, I'm a pro hero, present Mike. Quote. Hello, Mr. Yamada, my name is Son Gohan. Polite, huh, not like you, old man," Yamada said towards his old friend, eliciting a tired sigh, typical of Aizawa. "You two are irrational. Gohan, get dressed, we're going out." Already aware, the young man immediately rushed into the bathroom and in less than 3 seconds, returned to the front door, fully dressed in the clothes Eraserhead had given him during their outing. Aizawa's eyes widened for a moment, surprised by the speed, but what had happened at the restaurant reminded him that it was actually quite normal. "Perfect," he said, turning towards the stairs. Hizashi, meanwhile, was still surprised by the display. His hair, magically pointing to the sky, shook in the breeze. "Oh my! Listeners, what is this speed? What's your alter?" he exclaimed, drawing some disapproving looks. As they headed towards the exit, Son Gohan simply smiled, a bit embarrassed. He was so eager that he had forgotten to manage his power. Given that he was recovering strength, and due to his battle with Cell, he had benefited from a Zenkai boost, the legendary ability to become stronger if a Saiyan narrowly escaped death. It was a bit more complicated for him to fully control his strength, as after all, he had never really needed to lower it to the strict minimum. He had trained with Goku to manage the percentage of power and control his Super Saiyan form, but the buildings and people of this world were much less sturdy than his home and loved ones. He mentally noted to control himself better but refrained from mentioning it aloud. Aizawa connected eyes with him, waiting for an answer. He already knew his alter from his medical file, but he had never seen it. Gohan simply created a small energy sphere the size of a tennis ball in his hand and let them observe in silence. Shota didn't touch the ball, but seemed curious, unlike Hizashi who attempted to touch it. Gohan instantly made the blue sphere in his hand disappear and gave the hero a solemn look. "Don't touch it, you'll burn your hand," he warned, hoping the conversation on the topic would end. He wasn't aware of Aizawa's best friend's curiosity. "Wow, listener. I'm curious, can you create more balls like that? Can you throw them?" Flattered by the attention but embarrassed to be the sole topic of discussion, Gohan decided to cut the conversation about his abilities short. He would say the same thing he told the doctors. "Well, yes, a lot more. I can throw them or shape them into different forms. Energy is all over my body, so I can use it to fly, for example, or to increase my physical strength." Wow! Impressive. We've got a hero in the making here, haven't we, Shota? Quote. The mentioned Shota grumbled, casting a weary look. Yeah. Leave him alone now. Gohan noticed the dynamic between the two. One was the silent, calm, and thoughtful type, while the other was loud and smiling. The yin and the yang. He found them amusing to watch but took advantage of the walk to analyze the hospital's surroundings, missing no details, fully aware of his environment and its risks. That was most important. Quickly, they reached the car, dubbed the Aizawa Mobile by President Mike. Once aboard the old car, they set off to a place Gohan hadn't seen yet, a highway. Well, he had seen it before arriving in the city and thus at the hospital, as he had walked near the major road. But this was the first time he could observe the infrastructure while being fully conscious. Aizawa and Yamada talked loudly in the front of the car, occasionally asking for his opinion but quickly deciding not to include him in the conversation when they saw him curiously observing the surroundings. It's beautiful, Gohan simply stated, looking at the vast fields and expanses in the distance. Yamada turned around, raising an eyebrow, following what his young listener was pointing at. Yeah, it's pretty nice around here, he said, pushing his sunglasses back up his nose. Soon, Yamada and Aizawa would have to move to Tokyo, further northeast, to work at UA. Maybe they would take Gohan with them. Probably, even. Aizawa noticed how much Gohan seemed interested in nature. The other day, he had pestered him to know the names of the flowers in the hospital garden, and today, he was admiring the distant landscape. Aizawa preferred the city, and at night if possible, but he also enjoyed country getaways, though they were rare. It had a certain charm, he had to admit, being able to watch nature follow its course in peace. "It seems you like nature," he stated calmly, keeping his eyes on the road. They still had a half-hour drive to the extra fun activity Hisashi had suggested. Of course, Gohan replied instantly, recalling the words of his friend Android 16. "It's because I love nature that I want to protect it. Being a hero for a good reason. But personally, I prefer the city," said Yamada, searching for pleasant music on the radio, preferably something that matched the calm and relaxing atmosphere of the car ride. "Oh, and why?" Aizawa coughed and chuckled softly. "He's afraid of insects. Vegeta was afraid of worms. That gives him something in common with him, even though they are nothing alike," Gohan thought before bursting into laughter, remembering the day he visited the Saiyans scared by little critters while he was a great fighter. Aizawa laughed, or as much as he could with his calm and detached character, while Hisashi shuddered at the mention of insects. He hated them with every fiber of his being and hoped never to see them again, but he knew it was inevitable. At least in the city, he didn't have to constantly deal with those creatures. Deciding to change the subject, he turned up the radio volume and listened for a few minutes. "So, listener, what are your favorite types of music?" Gohan stopped looking at the landscape and turned his face towards Present Mike, unsure of what to answer. He didn't often listen to music, in fact, it was extremely rare. When he was younger, he liked listening to Electro and forced Piccolo to watch him dance, cutting off his meditation. But after Trunks' arrival and therefore his father's return, he spent 3 years intensively training and studying with his mother. They went out and had fun, of course, but he no longer had time to dance and listen to music as before. "I don't listen to it often, but I would like to be able to do it more," he admitted, feeling a wave of nostalgia. "Don't worry. We will listen to lots of music on the way." So, he began, searching for a more rhythmic radio station. Deathcore radio. Yay. What followed made Aizawa grimace, but he couldn't turn off the music because he was too focused on the road. Gohan was ecstatic, he loved this music, feeling a real excitement listening to it. It was raw and unrefined, but the dynamic and sustained rhythm allowed him to quickly get into the mood. The next 20 minutes passed in a deafening noise, where Gohan and Yamada discussed the technical details of the music without any difficulty. From what little he could hear, the boy seemed to know his stuff, despite rarely listening to music. Finally, and to Shota's great relief, they reached a parking lot. "Here we are. An amusement park. Super fun," exclaimed Hisashi as he got out of the Aizawa Mobile. It had been a long time since Gohan had been on a ride, he had to admit, and he was eager to have a little fun. For now, he was pumped up by the metal music of his new friend, and the idea of moving a bit was great. He doubted he would feel great thrills, but it was welcome. "Ah. I knew it was a good idea to come here," said Present Mike, turning to his best friend. "So, listeners, what shall we do first? Roller coasters? Bumper cars? Or the main attraction? The hardcore speed?" Aizawa groaned, already regretting his decision. Why had he listened to his friend? Exclamation mark. It was too late to back out now, but he had not come for himself, so he let the young Saiyan choose. Gohan looked curious, and as they entered the Wild West-style park, he admired all the rides, not missing any details. He could hear the joyful screams of children and their parents having fun, just like when he used to have fun with his father. An image came to his mind, and he had to use all his strength not to think about it at the moment. Mr. Aizawa and Mr. Yamada had come to please him, and it would be selfish to show sadness or sorrow in front of them. "This one," he said simply, stretching. The two adults looked at each other, uncertain. "That's the loop. Be careful, it goes ultra fast," warned the blonde kindly, but he didn't know how slow it seemed to the young man. "Yeah, let's go. Mr. Aizawa, are you coming?" asked Gohan, accompanied by Yamada, while the nocturnal hero did not move from his spot. He froze at the question, and after a few seconds, he sighed and joined them. The waiting was rather short, just about 10 minutes. There weren't many people on that Thursday, so they might as well enjoy it. Moreover, the park would be crowded in just a few days, with the summer vacations approaching. Shota noticed how easily Gohan could talk to people, easily making friends with Hisashi, but he still seemed on his guard. If Shota wasn't a pro-hero, he would have missed many micro-expressions and small gestures from Goku's son. He observed everything he could see with a strategic eye, and he only relaxed once he was completely sure there was no danger. He glanced at the other pro-heroes around, but he didn't pay them much attention. He didn't seem to trust them to ensure his safety. Aizawa said nothing but kept this information in mind. Then it was finally their turn. They boarded the fake cart and fastened their seatbelts, also grabbing the iron bar in front of them. The fake train started slowly, but its speed quickly increased, reaching over 50 kilometers per hour in a few seconds. Then, after a short straight line, it was time for the first loop. Yamada was screaming happily, while Gohan raised his arms in the air, amused by the slow speed, as Aizawa grimaced, not enjoying his body being moved at such a speed in multiple directions. After a series of even more violent loops, the ride ended, leaving a pallid Aizawa, even more than usual, and two happy goofballs. "Wow! That was cool!" exclaimed Present Mike. "So, ready for a second round, listener?" Gohan turned to him, smiling, and nodded vigorously. "Yeah." The crazy duo headed towards another activity, leaving behind an Aizawa who needed time to recover. He sat on a free bench and grabbed his water bottle, taking a big gulp. This outing was going well so far, and although he didn't enjoy the crowds or the attractions much, the boy he was looking after seemed to enjoy it. That was the most important thing, that he could relax and think about something else. The young man's smile was contagious, and Aizawa found himself smiling back at him a couple of times since they had gotten out of the car. "Oh, Aizawa!" exclaimed a female voice a bit further away. "Oh no, not her." Unfortunately for Shota, she had arrived before he had the chance to leave. There was no escape. He would have to face this ordeal alone. She sat down on the bench next to him, giving him a kind smile. "Hello, Fukukado. Call me Emi." "No. Yes." Aizawa sighed, already tired of this conversation. It had been several months since he last saw her, and he was all the better for it. She normally worked on the other side of the country. What was she doing in Kyoto? "What are you doing here?" She looked at him, her smile never fading. "Well, you know, since I became a teacher, I've got quite a lot of holidays. So I came here to relax, and bam, I run into you. It's a sign of fate. Let's get married. She hadn't changed in 6 months, and he wasn't sure if that was a good thing. He didn't show it, but he was particularly sad when she left to teach on the other side of the country. Hisashi had shown him his dismay, and it was because of that idiot that she was convinced she would marry him one day. No, he whispered, watching her laugh, her long turquoise hair falling over her shoulders. She was dressed in a rather colorful outfit, compared to him who was, as usual, dressed in black from head to toe. But why? Let's start a home full of laughter and children. And there she went again with her delusions. Shota grimaced, tired. The only thing missing now was for Hisashi and Gohan to come back. No doubt they would get along well. Too well, even. As if fate wanted to strike him down, his best friend, accompanied by the boy, returned. "Oh, it's you, Emmy. How are you?" "I'm in great shape. Look at all these attractions. We're going to have so much fun all together, and, who is this child?" she declared, only pausing for breath when she noticed Gohan. The boy stepped forward, smiling gently at the woman who seemed as energetic as present Mike. He introduced himself quickly, but she turned immediately back to the grumpy man. "Oh, you're taking care of a child. I didn't know that." Sweat began to trickle down Aizawa's temple as he stood up abruptly. There was only one thing left to do, and with a bit of luck, he could divert her attention away from him, if only for a moment. "How about, we go on an attraction?" he found himself saying, though he had no other choice. Emmy jumped to her feet, as surprised as Yamada. "Great, I decide," she exclaimed, surely seeking the most terrifying one for her future husband. They walked for a few minutes, following her, until they arrived in front of an attraction that looked quite sinister. "Ahaha. The House of Terror." Quote. Gohan raised an eyebrow, unimpressed at first, and glanced at the others to gauge their reactions. Aizawa seemed weary. Yamada was grinning stupidly, probably scheming something nefarious with a sly gleam in his eyes. As for the lady whose name he didn't know, she was grinning ear to ear, grabbing Shota's limp arm. "Gohan, listener. You and I will stay here, okay?" "But why?" the young man retorted immediately, seeing no reason why he couldn't join. "What if I bought you an ice cream, what do you say?" Present Mike said, pointing to a stand not far away, instantly winning the young friend's agreement. "Hisashi!" Aizawa exclaimed, feeling betrayed as Emmy dragged him into the attraction. He suddenly feared being completely isolated with this woman. But he disappeared into the dark mansion amidst the sadistic laughter of his best friend. They didn't see the two for the next 15 minutes. Yamada ordered 2 XXL ice creams, his chocolate-flavored, and Gohan's cherry-flavored. Unlike Shota, Hisashi hadn't yet seen the young man eat. In just about 10 seconds, the entirety of the ice cream, including the cone, had vanished, and he seemed to have taken his time. Present Mike's glasses slipped again, and he stared, mouth agape. "So, who is that lady, Mr. Yamada?" Son asked, wiping his lips. "She's a longtime friend, since our graduation from high school. Shota and I have worked with her numerous times. Our agencies were next to each other. And so, a friendship developed between her and Shota, but he doesn't want to admit it." Quote. Son raised an eyebrow. He didn't really think his friend liked the woman, but he could be mistaken, he was still learning about the man. "Ah, are you sure? I mean, he didn't seem happy that we left him alone with her." "Ah. But you see, it's because he's afraid of making a mistake. You have to help me get them to spend time together today." Mr. Yamada's infectious TV presenter-style smile touched Gohan. The friendship between the two men was very solid, and although it wasn't his business, Hisashi was seeking his friend's happiness. Goku's son could only nod, smiling in return. "All right. I'm in." Yamada was very pleased with this response and stood up to order 2 more ice creams, with caramel topping. "My boy, we're going to be the best of friends." Quote. Moved by this sudden display, the young man's smile became more genuine. He was actually having a great time, away from the hospital and his somber thoughts. "You shouldn't be having fun, you should be looking for a way back," the little voice aggressively whispered, but he decided not to listen and enjoy the sunny afternoon instead. After a while discussing the best attractions and how they might have been built, the joyful duo found Aizawa at the entrance of the House of Terror. For the first time in his life, the man seemed to have a slight blush on his cheeks, smiling so brightly it could eclipse the sun behind him. Yamada interrupted a passerby and asked them to take a photo of the 4 of them. It took a lot of scheming for the 2 pranksters to place Shota next to his sweet Emi, but they finally succeeded. Hisashi gave an understanding wink to the blissful woman, and Gohan smiled at the camera. Emi wrapped her arms around Aizawa at the last moment, and he stared at the woman in disbelief. Present Mike swore to make tons of copies and to keep one at his place, and to force his friend to have one too. The quartet then moved towards the flagship attraction, the Hardcore Speed. A roller coaster going at 80 kilometers per hour, known for its brutality, but that wasn't what worried the grumpy hero. And then, he jumped out of fear at the sight of the fake ghost. Ahahaha. The heroine burst out laughing, as her 2 allies laughed at Aizawa's expense. "I'm sure he would have hugged me if he could." "That's not true," the man retorted, turning his head to look away, unaccustomed to such public embarrassment. He would have his revenge sooner or later. After a few minutes' walk, they found themselves in front of the impressive ride. The queue was long, meaning a never-ending conversation. Gohan's eyes widened as he stared at the Wild West-style decor, asking the 3 adults for details. Aizawa was glad the conversation wasn't revolving around him, so he joined in, but it was really Present Mike who was the loudest. Some people recognized them in the crowd, but among the trio of professionals, only the 2 flashiest were recognized. After 15 minutes, and having exhausted the young scholar's stock of questions, Hisashi had the brilliant idea to announce loudly, "Shota and I are going to be pros at UA." "Wow. That's incredible, I thought you didn't like kids, Aizawa." He grimaced and then sighed. "I tolerate them now." A sparkle appeared in Emi's eyes, and she got a bit too close to him. "So, you do want kids?" "I knew it. Let's get married." Quote. Gohan watched the scene, amazed at the courage it took to ask such a thing so naturally. Well, considering how his own parents got married, he didn't have much to say, but he couldn't help but respect this woman's fervor and determination. Moreover, it wasn't a joke, it was sincere, he could feel her energy emanating. "No." Aizawa calmly refused, moving away, but it was in vain as she moved even closer, and the corridor became increasingly cramped. His tired eyes turned towards his best friend, who pretended to comment on the decor, earning fake attention from Gohan. He was trapped. No escape in sight, it was going to end like in that dreadful haunted house. He hadn't flinched out of fear, it was an accident. Unfortunately, this dramatic event would forever be etched in his memory. After an interminable 10 minutes during which Emi animatedly declared how wonderful their large family life would be, the queue finally ended. Aizawa felt an immense joy, sincerely convinced that he could avoid sitting next to her during the ride, which was expected to be tumultuous. They then boarded a false rusty cart. Ms. Joke sat all the way to the left, waiting with a titanic smile for her lover to come to her side. Aizawa attempted to escape and push Gohan in his place, but the boy was as firmly rooted to the ground as an iron bar. The half-breed gave a knowing look to present Mike, who took advantage of the momentary surprise to push the man next to his betrothed. Aizawa cursed but stopped struggling, fully understanding that his best friend had betrayed him, no longer harboring any doubts in his wounded mind. Emi welcomed him with a broad smile, and as usual, he feigned disinterest, satisfied with his hard and unapproachable appearance. After a couple of seconds, the last two members of the improvised group settled in. Yamada screamed with joy as the ride began, ready for 5 minutes of extreme speed. Gohan smiled calmly, although the new speed initially made him raise an eyebrow. Aizawa shuddered. He did not like being shaken at all, but riding the ride pleased everyone, especially the kid. Emi mocked him and didn't miss any of his grimaces, briefly reminding him of the haunted house episode. There was a loop so abrupt that Aizawa almost hiccuped, wondering if a villain had ever put him in such discomfort. The answer was no, so far. Gohan seemed to be having fun, and a childlike smile engraved his features when his jet black eyes met Aizawa's. Ceasing to worry about the ride for a few seconds, he noticed for the first time a mischievous smile on Gohan's face, simply joyful, living the moment to the fullest. This brief but intense moment ended, and they exited the unbearable cart for Aizawa, and the fun cart for the others. He quickly regained his balance but did not fail to notice his legs trembling under the pressure. It had been a long time. Emi cheerfully patted his back, blowing what he guessed to be kind words. Yamada and Sun discussed joyfully, gladly enjoying the moment. The scene was mundane for an external spectator, but for the taciturn hero, it was a beautiful painting, full of hope for the future. The child could one day overcome his trauma if he was surrounded by loving people. The rest of the outing did not last long, perhaps 45 minutes to an hour, but it was much less tumultuous. They all talked together, getting to know the others, especially Gohan, who showed himself joking and more open than on their previous outing. It was a good sign. The look of fear had partially disappeared from his young yet so experienced eyes. However, as soon as they left the park, that look suddenly returned, and he began to watch for any change, any external information. Shota couldn't believe it, 10 years old but so cautious. No. It wasn't fear, it was a methodical and complete analysis of every detail, almost strategic. As if he was preparing for a surprise assault at every moment. Emi left them and went her own way, but not before marking her phone number on the face of her future husband, with a marker. The return trip was relatively calm, except for the abominable music of Hazashi, who was the only sane man to listen to hardcore German metal and to be totally relaxed. Despite being his best friend, he remained fundamentally different from Aizawa, and that was certainly the reason for their friendship. Yamada was a ray of sunshine, joyful and social, and although he often received silence during his radio presentations, he continued to retry, no matter the gravity or the ridicule. It was one of his greatest qualities. Aizawa, on the other hand, was often in a bad mood, only wishing to sleep after a good night's work. He was grumpy and did not seek attention, supposedly because he did not want villains to know his power, but mostly because he did not like it. Their strange dynamic had worked for nearly 10 years. They were best friends at UA, forming an inseparable trio until that terrible day when they lost their third comrade. This event had a strong impact on young Shota and closed him off, but Hisashi never left him alone. He had pushed the darkness away from him. So, Hisashi could sometimes be horribly annoying, like today, but Aizawa would never let him down. They had been watching over each other for so long. When he saw his best friend and the boy he intended to protect, a thin smile adorned his features. It was a good day, after all. Gohan was very happy. He had met two new friends, with unique characters, and for the first time since his arrival here, he did not feel the emptiness that threatened his heart. Every moment had been either touching or amusing, not leaving him time to feel sorrow. Mr. Aizawa had taken care of him, in his own way, and had paid attention to his feelings and happiness. He was the first hero he had met, and probably the most remarkable despite his silence and facade. Sun did not know if the man spent time with him out of pity or because he genuinely wanted to know him, but in any case, he was there when needed. And in that, he was now a close friend. He would not forget this day anytime soon and would engrave it in his memory as a joyful and comforting memory, chasing away the doubts and sufferings that invaded his dreams and daily life. He missed each of his friends, but maybe Aizawa could help him better understand why he was here. Mr. Aizawa is a remarkable hero. The distant view of the hospital revealed itself, and a shiver ran down his body. He would be alone again, in misunderstanding. This place, it was his greatest fear, his greatest disgust, and he did not wish to approach it. He kept his calm, remembering Piccolo's words about what a true warrior was, and that he could not panic. But his brief lapse was noticed by the two men, who exchanged their doubts with a look. No matter, he had to return, whatever the cost, because where would he go if he ran away from this place? Leizawa Mobile parked a bit away, and they walked quietly to the garden. Perhaps it was the only pleasant place that allowed for reverie, the beauty of the plants and their originality contrasting with the uniform white walls. Gohan marveled again at their splendor, admiring them as if he saw them for the first time, devouring every detail with his eyes. He quickly questioned Present Mike about the names of flowers, but received a silence as resounding as that of Eraserhead. The two suddenly seemed serious, which surprised the young boy, cutting short his observation. He stared at the two men, expecting something, feeling a certain pressure in their energies. Aizawa coughed and spoke. "When will you be fully healed?" Quote. "Well, I'm doing pretty well. The doctor recommends a week of rest, and I should be able to leave." "Well. Good. In a few weeks, this idiot and I are moving to Tokyo," he began, pointing at Present Mike. The information took his breath away, and if they left and he never saw them again. The man was his only friend here, he did not want to see him disappear as suddenly as he had appeared. "You're going to leave?" he questioned, as if each word cost him. Aizawa sighed and seemed to force a smile on his features. "Yes, and I wanted to know if you wanted to accompany us." Surprise. Shock. And finally, the most important emotion. Joy. A place to go, people to follow, a reason to move, perhaps answers to his questions plaguing his mind. Gohan stared at the man, his black eyes letting his surprise filter through, as he tried to keep his emotions and feelings under control since his arrival, maybe out of fear, maybe out of rage, but until now, he had not wanted to fully reveal his emotions. But his barriers fell, and a big smile adorned his face. The fear surrounding him in its black mist was dispelled. "Yes. I'd be happy to," finally exclaimed Gohan, to whom everything seemed less heavy, less frightening. Even the hospital ceased to be so intimidating because he now knew that he was no longer alone in this world. It was not his parents, Mr. Piccolo, or any of his close friends, but it was still someone he was beginning to respect. That day, Aizawa became his hero. The man approached him and awkwardly placed his hand on his shoulder, with a smile wider and more relieved than what he was used to giving. He was happy, a bright and soothing happiness, and he felt serene. Whatever the future held, he was convinced he had made the right decision. Gohan hugged Aizawa, holding back his tears from flowing. The man seemed slightly surprised but tried not to show it. It was more than he expected, so he wrapped his arms around the boy, not exactly sure how to proceed. They remained in silence for a while, Yamada watching calmly from a little further away, keeping his peace. After a few dozen seconds, Aizawa gave some words of encouragement to the boy, telling him it was time to return to his hospital room. They walked there in a pleasant and peaceful silence. There was no need to speak to fill the gaps. It was at the doorstep of his room that they all stopped. Gohan grabbed the handle and opened the room, but he was not greeted by the heavy and suffocating breath that usually met him. He was no longer afraid of this place, less than before anyway. He turned around and smiled at Aizawa and Yamada, then he entered the room. After a short discussion, the two adults left the room and left Gohan alone. He had a lot to think about, and he also needed to rest after a day as emotionally charged as this one. The rays of the setting sun filtered through the window as Gohan changed, putting on a night outfit. The meal came soon after, and he devoured it in 2 bites, watching a wildlife documentary on a national channel. The animals of this world captivated him. They were so numerous and different, like the inhabitants of the planet. His world was much more uniform, with many small minor towns, and only 4 large ones, at each end of the world. Deserts and rocky wastelands were very common and often ended up hosting battles between powerful warriors. Here, there was an incredibly diverse culture, and no place was alike. He had not yet had the pleasure of exploring everything by himself, but he would not be long in doing so. His curiosity was too great. When night came, he could not find sleep, due to the excitement running through his body. This day was so crazy. Nothing incredibly amazing, no battles against genocidal aliens, but simply getting out of the hospital and meeting new people was pleasant. He decided to meditate, so he sat on the floor, legs crossed, and reflected. Since he had arrived on this planet, his human contacts had been minimal, just with the doctors who came to examine him. Sometimes they would chat a bit, but the doctor always left. When Eraserhead entered his life, he was alone and didn't know what to do. Loneliness was eating at him, but the man inquired about his state. Gohan hadn't really known what to tell him in his investigation, aside from the most basic and essential, the things he couldn't lie about. The traces of his battle against Cell marked his body, but not this planet or this society. So, he had explained things as simply as possible, hoping that once the hero learned that Cell was dead, he would move on. However, he came back, friendly and just to spend time with him, which touched him deeply. Perhaps he had just felt pity for him, but the fact was he had been there when Gohan needed him. He had taken him out of the hospital and shown him the city. This outing had marked him, as it was the first time he could see the world through his own eyes and not through television. He was accompanied by the hero, who took care to show him things so he could understand. Gohan hadn't found the motivation to leave the hospital out of fear. He could have left and not returned, but he was scared. Mr. Piccolo would have been ashamed, but he wasn't there, like Goku. Deprived of guidance and information, he had wallowed in his bed. What was the point in moving if he had no goal, no will? The more he thought about his situation, the less he understood it. Why and how had he arrived here? He had asked the doctors, and even Aizawa, what had happened on the day he arrived in this world, but nothing out of the ordinary had come up. Everything was calm. Then Aizawa came back with Yamada, and Gohan had a good day, without thinking about his past, nor even why he was there. He just lived in the moment, and he appreciated it. Meeting people so joyful and peaceful, it was like before, restful. Now that he was leaving with the man in a few days, he felt a bit more liberated. He didn't have answers to his questions, but he at least had a place to go, and maybe by following Shota, he would find some of that happiness he cherished so much. He just hoped the future would be bright. To be continued. Chapter 4. On the Road. Hospital. 2 p.m., a few days after the amusement park outing. Within the sterile confines of his hospital room, Gohan was a whirlwind of motion, pushing his physical limits with a series of exercises designed to reclaim his strength. Time was ticking away. Aizawa's arrival was imminent, signaling the moment Gohan could finally break free from these whitewashed walls. The tranquil meditations under Piccolo's tutelage no longer sufficed to drain his overflowing energy reservoir. Movement was imperative. His wounds were nearly relics of the past, all but his shoulder knitting back together under the diligent care of his Saiyan genetics, tirelessly working to mend the final vestiges of damage. Completing his 3000th push-up, Gohan collapsed to the ground, a light sheen of sweat adorning his brow. He cast a disgruntled glance at the clock. Another 30 minutes in this purgatory of waiting. Today marked a turning point. Aizawa and Yamada were setting off for Tokyo to commence their roles as educators at UA. From whispers and fragments gathered from doctors, the television, and the heroes themselves, Gohan understood UA to be a bastion of hero training, a prestigious academy molding the defenders of tomorrow. The notion of heroism ignited a fire within him, a yearning to join the ranks of those who stood on the front lines. His life had been steeped in battle, his hands already stained with the weight of countless lives saved. He felt ready to embrace this path, yet this world demanded a formal education in heroics, a rule he was prepared to follow. Yet, this resolve was shadowed by a growing acceptance of his prolonged stay in this foreign land. Days turned into weeks with no clue as to his arrival in this world. Aizawa and his fiery companion were just as clueless, and the medical staff, the internet, and the media offered no insights. His investigation was at a standstill, leaving him to ponder his next move amidst uncertainty. His efforts to meditate on a solution proved fruitless. Now, facing relocation to Tokyo, Gohan resolved to keep a vigilant eye for any sign that might illuminate his path, though paranoia was not an option, a lesson drilled into him by Piccolo. With a groan, Gohan launched into another set of crunches, determined to exhaust every possibility. Today's move to Tokyo might open new doors, offering fresh opportunities to seek answers. His mentor's wisdom echoed in his mind, guiding him through this tumult of thoughts. Exhausted yet invigorated, Gohan lay sprawled on the floor, catching his breath. His body yearned for the rigor of training, now fully recovered and stronger than ever, a testament to the legendary Saiyan resilience, the Zenkai boost that flourished in the face of near-death experiences. After 20 minutes, he decided to work on controlling his tail. It was challenging, the appendage didn't always obey his commands, acting more on instinct and reflex than on his deliberate instructions. He hoped this unpredictability wouldn't jeopardize him in future battles. Gohan wasn't naive, he knew a day would come when he'd have to fight again, the tranquility of peace a fragile veneer that could shatter at any moment, leaving people in desperate need of his strength. He couldn't afford to grow complacent. While he was aware of his superior strength compared to most, evil knew no bounds or limitations. Had Cell truly been vanquished and Gohan remained in his own world, surrounded by friends, maybe he could have savored peace. Yet, in this society, he felt an obligation to be prepared, thus opting for a light training regimen he planned to intensify later. Training wasn't something he detested, in fact, he quite enjoyed it. What he truly loathed was the aftermath, every session inevitably leading to a confrontation that would determine the fate of his family and the universe. But this world wasn't his, possibly not even his galaxy. He harbored hope that certain universal laws wouldn't apply and that his worries were unfounded. His tail lashed out fiercely, slicing through the air with energy. He chuckled momentarily before the weight of his thoughts dampened his spirits. The pressure was unbearable, a feeling he never managed well. Goku always advised tackling things one at a time, assuring that everything would work out if he lived in the moment and maintained a smile. It was an overwhelmingly positive outlook, one that made it impossible to dwell on sadness or darkness on this particular day. Today marked his departure from the accursed hospital, a genuinely positive development. He harbored a deep-seated loathing for the place, too many suppressed fears and bad memories. Since Aizawa's offer to accompany him, he managed to bear his stay, but the detachment wasn't complete. He understood why his father also despised hospitals. Goku's aversion to needles and inactivity made such places akin to the antechamber of hell. Shota was a good man, and Gohan was relieved to be leaving with him. He held the utmost trust in this hero alone. While he appreciated and respected other heroes, the issue was his lack of familiarity with them and the fear that a villain could defeat them. Eraserhead, however, was a man he believed in. 5 minutes later, the door swung open, snapping Gohan back to reality. It was the renowned hero, their eyes meeting. Ready to leave? Yes. Aizawa scanned the room. Got all your stuff? Quote. Gohan glanced at his modest bag, cradling just a spare set of clothes and an All Might figurine, a prize from a game he'd conquered days earlier. I believe that's everything. Let's depart. The man nodded, ushering him through the door towards liberation. They treaded through the corridors in a silence that wasn't just bearable but comforting, eventually passing the hospital's garden. This is the only place in the hospital that feels right, Gohan confessed, his voice a whisper, as he cast one final longing look at the flowers, enchanted by their subtle fragrance. The hero nodded, allowing him a moment to linger. I'm sure you're eager to leave, so let's go. Hizashi is waiting for us in Tokyo. Oh, that's great. Will I be seeing him often? Gohan inquired, his tone carrying a hint of excitement. The radio show host's vibrant personality was like a breath of fresh air to him. Reaching the car, Aizawa finally responded, "Yes, he'll be spending a few days with us. His apartment won't have running water for a week." Content with the answer, Gohan buckled his seatbelt, not out of necessity, but to silence the incessant beeping that grated on his nerves. He wasn't fond of the constraint it imposed on his movements, but he shrugged it off, bracing himself for the long journey ahead. Shota dialed the music to a soothing mix of jazz and classical, though, curiously, a few rock and roll tracks found their way into his playlist. His musical taste seemed to mirror his personality, offering Gohan an auditory pleasure. With his Saiyan hearing far surpassing that of an average human, he easily picked up on the subtlest nuances in the music. The first hour of the journey unfolded as a serene musical odyssey, with Gohan soaking in the swiftly changing scenery, the world outside moving as if in slow motion. He peppered his legal guardian with questions, quenching his thirst for knowledge as best as the man could. After drinking in enough of the landscape, Gohan initiated an engaging conversation about Tokyo. "What's the city like?" Quote. Aizawa shrugged, searching for the right words. "Bigger than Kyoto, but with more crime." That remark alone was enough to make Sun's son wince. It didn't sound like good news at all. The mere thought of people suffering without his ability to intervene troubled him deeply. He wanted to help. And he wanted to do it as soon as possible. Noticing the gleam of curiosity in the boy's eyes, he sighed before speaking in a softer, more reassuring tone. "Don't worry, everything will be fine. There are many professional heroes patrolling the area." This sparked several questions in Gohan, who looked at him curiously. "Will you be working as a hero too?" He knew the man was to be a teacher, but wondered if he could continue his hero work as well. Turning the wheel to overtake a sluggish driver, he took a few seconds before responding. "Much less than before, I'll be working at UA, and taking care of you," he added silently in his thoughts. Educating the boy would require considerable time and effort, but he had already committed to it. Thus, he wouldn't have as much time for his hero work, but he didn't want the young one to feel any guilt. Sun understood and gazed eagerly into the distance. "I'm looking forward to seeing the city and exploring the country." Again, it was a notable trait of the boy's personality, a desire to travel and meet new people. He couldn't stay still. Staying in the hospital for so long must have been a test of his patience. Perhaps during future vacations, they could travel around the country. He would never have done it alone because it didn't interest him, but if it could make the kid happy, then why not? With his new salary, it wouldn't be a problem. "We still have 2 hours of driving left," he informed, focusing more on the road ahead. Gohan sighed and settled deeper into his seat, careful not to damage it, then let sleep take him. Shota glanced at him for a moment, and a smile crept onto his features. He was pleased with how things were going so far. He had grown quite fond of the boy and could, albeit not fully, understand his pain. The young one's courage was quite extraordinary. He had already fought villains, multiple times he suspected, and yet he smiled and got excited about every little thing he saw. His gentleness and joviality contrasted with his past, but it was reassuring, a sign that things could get better. He wasn't blind to the traumas present in the child either. During their few outings, he had spotted some, ranging from simple nervous tics to a methodical scrutiny of every unfamiliar place, as if expecting a threat around every corner. The boy didn't trust heroes to ensure his safety, he had said, and it seemed sincere, that he found Aizawa admirable, but his actions showed he was always ready to ensure his own safety at any moment. This was less reassuring, but with time, perhaps it would diminish a bit more. It wasn't so bad for him to be prepared and confident towards any threats that might cross his path, but he would make it clear, when the time came, that he must fully trust the professionals to maintain society's proper functioning. So that he could finally enjoy a proper childhood, a childhood he was determined to provide. Fatherhood was an uncharted territory for him. He had seldom interacted with children his age. Moreover, at 25, he had never been in a stable enough relationship to contemplate having children. This was a first, yet he genuinely hoped to be a good father and provide the happiness this child deserved. He knew the boy had once been part of a happy family, and wouldn't regard him as his biological father. He merely aspired to be a viable paternal figure. Regardless, he was determined to fulfill this role to the best of his ability. Shota Aizawa was a man of laid-back demeanor, but once he made a decision, he committed fully with unwavering resolve. He was certain he would support Gohan. The sight of Tokyo interrupted his thoughts. Entering the city, he took out his phone to follow the GPS directions. They would reside in a well-regarded neighborhood, a mere 15-minute walk from his workplace. Had he been living alone, he might have opted for a much smaller house, but that was no longer the case. He let the boy sleep and drove peacefully, occasionally observing the youngster's voluminous hair sway with the journey. He pondered how his hair managed to maintain such a palm tree-like shape, contemplating a potential visit to the barber. More importantly, he continued towards their new home. He had visited it several times to ensure it was a decent living space and to move in some belongings. He had bought a bed for Gohan but would leave the room's decoration to him later. The neighborhood was quiet, typical for a weekday. He parked in the small garage next to the house, pleased to be there. The rent would cost a significant sum, but it was fair. After turning off the car, he allowed the adolescent to sleep a bit longer, noting the boy's recent lack of rest. Opening the window, he took out a cigarette from his pack. His smoking was infrequent, and he had been cutting down for months, still allowing himself one or two a day. He wondered if he could ever quit entirely, especially since smoking in front of his future students at UA was prohibited for good reasons. After taking a final drag, he discarded the cigarette butt and decided it was time to wake the youngster. His initial call went unanswered, so he tried again with more vigor. Still no response. Touching the boy's shoulder, Gohan finally opened his eyes, looking at him with a flash of alarm. His left hand trembled, fingers unfolding. Surprised at first, Aizawa should have known better. The boy had immediately assessed his surroundings, ready to react in less than a second. He relaxed, but Aizawa noted that touching the young man or invading his personal space without permission could end badly. It was a heavy indication. "We've arrived," he stated simply, stepping out of the car. "Oh, cool," he yawned before darting out in a flash, scanning his surroundings with a strategist's eye. He visibly relaxed once done. "It's a beautiful house," he simply stated, taking a step forward. Indeed, the Aizawa residence was of a respectable size, boasting one floor and a basement. It housed 3 bedrooms, one on the ground floor and 2 upstairs, along with 2 toilets and 2 bathrooms, a logical setup. Like any house, it featured a kitchen and living room. However, a garden of about 30 square meters lay beyond the living area, a significant reason for its price. Shota had thought it wise to include a green space for the boy, knowing his appreciation for nature and allowing him the opportunity to cultivate some plants if he wished. As long as he managed it himself without involving Shota, there was no issue. "I'll show you inside." Thus, they spent the next 30 minutes exploring the edifice, eventually reaching Gohan's room. Spanning 20 square meters, its size felt even more substantial due to the lack of furniture and decor. Sun lingered in silence for a moment. It was more than he had expected. Back home, his room was easily half this size, yet, furniture and his bed consumed all the space. Here, there was plenty. Only a small built-in wardrobe and a bed occupied the room. The walls were white, and he planned to change the color as soon as possible. White reminded him too much of the hospital. There was much work to be done to bring it to life, but it meant a lot, a place where he could rest and find comfort. He turned to Aizawa with a natural smile and nodded. "Thank you," he simply breathed as they exited the room. Gently placing his hand on his shoulder, they continued their tour. Shota's room was, exactly like him. Dark and strangely untidy. He didn't understand how it was possible, but there was already a nameless clutter scattered throughout. The walls were painted light gray, and the curtains were deep black. A bed, a wardrobe, and a dresser were present, atop which rested an old photo featuring Aizawa, Yamada, and another young man. Gohan suppressed his curiosity and finished his survey of the premises. Opposite the bed, a small TV and a gaming console were set up on a little cabinet. "There you go. If you ever have a problem and can't find me elsewhere, I'll be here. Well, let's go greet the neighbors before Hisashi arrives." Neighbors, now there was a strange prospect. His family was isolated from most villages surrounding Mount Paozu, rarely making contact with others nearby. Thus, he had never had neighbors. His mother had taught him that if he ever did, he should be polite and respectful, as with any type of relationship, except with bad boys. He was curious to meet his neighbors. "It's 6 o'clock, so they should already be here. Once this chore is done, we can relax," Shota declared wearily as he opened the front door, seemingly eager to get it over with. Sun raised an eyebrow, thoughtful. Why did he consider it a chore? To him, meeting new people was rather exciting, and he hoped to get along with them. It might be a social obligation, but it presented an opportunity to integrate. Aizawa, for his part, hoped to wrap it up quickly, and if it were up to him, he wouldn't even bother in the first place, as he wouldn't often meet his neighbors. But Hisashi had pointed out that since Gohan was young, perhaps he could make friends in the neighborhood and integrate more easily. First house, the Tagatas. Shota knocked on the door, and it wasn't long before a smiling man opened it. His eyes were peculiarly round, but his smile and expression made him feel warm and welcoming. "Hello," he exclaimed joyously, looking at his visitors. "What can I do for you?" "Hello," Aizawa began much more faintly. "We're your new neighbors, I just wanted to say hello." Then he extended his hand. The man grasped it firmly and smiled at his taciturn neighbor. "Pleased to meet you. I see you have a son, mine is about the same age." Mentioned for the first time, the boy stepped forward and bowed slightly, smiling at the man. He thought to deny the previous statement, but it was better to introduce himself first. "Hello, my name is Gohan, pleased to meet you," he introduced himself, preferring to be referred by his first name, more out of habit than anything else. The neighbor kept his smile and turned towards the inside of his house. "Mirio, come here." Quote. Quickly, an energetic boy rushed to the front door, wearing an All Might t-shirt and blue shorts. He looked a lot like his father, same face, but his blonde hair was longer and almost fell to his shoulders. He exchanged a few words with his father and turned to the newcomers. "Hi. My name is Mirio Tagata. My name is Son Gohan, but I prefer to be called Gohan." The young man raised an eyebrow, curious. "Funny name. Pleased to meet you too, Mr. Son." Aizawa decided to clear up the misunderstanding as soon as possible. "My name is Aizawa, I'm his legal guardian." "Ah, no matter." Mirio quickly replied, turning back to Gohan. "So, who's your favorite hero?" Pondering swiftly, he hesitated, then gave an answer, still smiling. He hadn't had contact with people around his age for a long time. "I like All Might, but my favorite is Eraserhead." Quote. "Who?" The blonde quickly asked, familiar with All Might like everyone else, but not the latter, and he was keen to know more heroes. Shota sighed, already weary from the journey and conversation. "Me." Realizing the situation, he turned towards the now recognized pro hero. "Wow, you're a pro hero!" Exclamation mark. Quote. Then the father decided to intervene. His son could be overly enthusiastic at times, but that was why he shone like a beacon in the night, radiant. "Go on, son. Slip on some shoes and show young Gohan around the neighborhood. Do you mind?" He asked Aizawa, who, seeing the curious and joyful expression of the boy, nodded in agreement. "Gohan, be back by 8 o'clock. Mr. Tagata, until next time," he said, turning towards his house, dreading the arrival of his best friend's garish yellow car. He turned once or twice to check on the youths, but they seemed to get along well, so he let them be. Mirio took no more than a couple of minutes to come out. It was a welcome distraction for him. He was quite bored during the summer holidays. Amakiji was vacationing further north of the country, and none of his middle school friends were available, so he spent his time training on his own. "So, there's a park that way," he began, heading up the street. "If you turn left, there's a bakery and a restaurant. If you turn right, there's a library and an adjacent bookstore." Gohan followed his new friend, observing the surroundings with a small smile, finding the neighborhood quite nice. He would explore it in more detail later. He first wanted to get to know the blonde. "It's nice here. So you like heroes?" Gohan asked, totally unprepared for what was to come. Mirio jumped to his feet and gave him a look filled with determination. "Of course. I'll be one later, and I'll save as many people as I can, like All Might," he exclaimed, a huge smile on his face. Gohan stared at him, momentarily stunned by the sudden burst, the will to succeed shining like the sun, sending pleasant sensations. The solemnity in his gaze gave young Sun a shiver. He had someone in front of him who truly wanted to become an altruistic hero. His own smile widened, always very happy to meet people who cared about the welfare of the innocent. "That's awesome. I also want to be a hero to help people." Tagata laughed as they continued walking. "We're going to be good friends." Quote. Indeed, that was what would happen. Due to their similar characters and motivations, the two were bound to get along well. After exploring the nearby streets, they stopped at the park, which was much larger and more diverse than the hospitals. "Wow, This one is beautiful," he said, looking at a yellow flower he had never seen before. "Do you like flowers?" Mirio inquired, joining him. Noticing Gohan's uncertain look at his question, he brightened. "I like them too, it always relaxes me to spend time in parks." Gohan nodded and continued walking, observing the park's plants. This world had such a variety of flora and fauna, he encountered new flowers at every step. "Nature is beautiful," he affirmed, sitting on a wooden bench nearby, while Mirio whistled calmly. He was very kind and communicative, and he had even spent time with him, introducing him to the surroundings, for which Gohan was grateful. His company was enjoyable, and he hoped they could become good friends, despite the blonde being slightly older. They talked about heroes, especially All Might, and he took the opportunity to learn a lot about how they were perceived in Japan. He wondered what the rest of the world was like, but he would have time for that later. Mirio proved to be full of resources and humor during their discussion, and he seemed to mimic, quite convincingly, some poses of the symbol of peace. Gohan discovered that for his new friend, All Might was more than just a hero he liked. He was his role model, a man he wanted to equal to become the greatest hero. He spoke of him with so much vigor and admiration that Gohan got caught up in the game. He only knew the hero through the media, but he hoped to meet him one day. One thing was certain, he had marked his entire country with his strength and kindness, and just for that, he had the complete sympathy of young son. "Ah. It's 7:30, we better head back," Mirio exclaimed, jumping off the bench. Gohan nodded seriously and followed him, not that he feared punishment if he returned late, but he did not want to annoy the man who had already done so much for him. He walked with Tagata, and they continued their conversation. To become a hero, there's no better place than UA. That's the high school where Mr. Aizawa will be teaching starting this term, he informed simply, pleased to see that the Hero Academy was as reputed as his legal guardian had said. Mirio seemed surprised, and not just a bit. "Really? Exclamation mark. He must be incredible then. All the teachers at UA are well-known heroes." Quote. Gohan had quickly understood that Aizawa didn't like media and public attention, mainly because he needed to keep his power relatively secret so villains couldn't get the upper hand on him. Losing the element of surprise could prove quite dangerous. But he was a very competent hero, according to Mr. Yamada, and Gohan hoped to see him fight one day. "He's very strong, I'm sure of it." Mirio seemed eager to continue the conversation but decided it was better to cut it short when he glanced at the time on his mobile phone. He spotted his house a little further down. Smiling, he gave his neighbor a pat on the back, who looked quite surprised by the physical contact. "That was fun. See you soon," he declared before heading home, waving his hand. He's really a good guy, Gohan thought as he entered his home. He opened the front door and noticed Present Mike sitting on the couch, a beer in hand. Shota was sitting next to him configuring the living room television. The young man removed his shoes and walked up to the living room. "Hello, Mr. Yamada. Yo Gohan," he greeted before taking a sip. "So, you made a friend. Shota told me the neighbor's son showed you around." Said Shota didn't show it, but he pricked up his ears, curious about how the boy's first solo outing had gone. Gohan sat on the dark brown couch, to the right of Present Mike, a small smile on his lips. "Yeah. Mirio is really nice. He showed me around the neighborhood, and we stopped at the park to talk a bit. He's a huge fan of All Might and wants to become a hero like him." "That's a good goal," said Hisashi simply, finishing his drink. I hope he makes it. But tell me, how's the neighborhood? He thought for a moment before answering, a gleam passing through his eyes. There's a library and a bookstore, I can't wait to go there. Quote. The radio presenter put his bottle on the coffee table and glanced at the youth. Indeed, he seemed to love discovering, so it made sense he liked reading. Books. Do you have a favorite genre? Quote. Then they talked all evening. Aizawa prepared a substantial meal, hoping it would be enough for the Saiyan with a gargantuan appetite. It turned out to be slightly too little, but the boy said nothing about it, preferring to discuss his favorite types of books, though never mentioning any specific works. Seeing that the young one was in a good mood and enjoyed reading and studying, he decided to inform him about some things during the meal. Gohan, I need to talk to you about your education. He raised an eyebrow, curious. Yes. Do you remember the test you took at the hospital? He asked while taking a bite of his pasta. Ah yes, that. Sun exhaled, recalling the strange test that had been given to him out of the blue to assess his knowledge. He had found it extremely easy, and had finished it very quickly, but it had nonetheless been a good distraction. They had given him more over time, increasingly challenging, but nothing he couldn't answer. But why was this subject coming up again? That was a test to estimate your educational level, as you had told us that you were homeschooled before. At the start of the term, you will be admitted to 6th grade, middle school. Normally, at 10 years old, it's still elementary, but your skills are more than sufficient for middle school. But that's no reason not to try to improve even more, but I must admit to being impressed. Middle school. A public school. It was a first for him, to imagine himself in contact with more people his age, but if they were all good people like Mirio, then there would be no problems. He wasn't so displeased, so he smiled. Thank you, Mr. Aizawa, I will do my best. When does the year start? It already started a quarter ago, but you will be transferred at the end of the summer vacation, in 3 weeks. Gohan seemed pensive, and he continued to dig in his plate, scraping what he had left. He glanced inside the dish but found it, to his greatest regret, empty. He would have liked to eat a little more. He returned to his wooden seat and sat down, masking his hunger as best he could. He didn't want to inconvenience the two men because of his appetite. Shota noted to make more food, or to choose more caloric items, but he wasn't sure if his wallet could handle it much longer. In any case, the trio enjoyed pleasant conversation, and then the dark night soon fell. It was midnight when Yamada lay down on the couch to sleep, and the two residents weren't far behind. Aizawa wished a good night and then retired to his room, already feeling tired from all the work done since the early morning. Gohan withdrew to his room and stretched out on his bed, comfortable. It had been a good day, and he truly felt at home in this house. The people were warm, and he had had a good day. Fortunately, he would never have to return to the hospital, and just that thought comforted him. He undressed and went to bed without delay, eager for the next day. Perhaps he could ask Mirio if he wanted to go out for a walk and talk about heroes as they did today, or maybe he would take a trip to the bookstore. What if he did both? Exclamation mark. His sleep was short-lived, only a couple of hours before he woke up, hunger gnawing at him. He descended the stairs and opened the fridge, finding not much to eat. There wasn't even any bread left for a meal. When it was like this, he had to go out and hunt something to satisfy his hunger. Disheartened, he went back to his room and put on the same clothes as the day before, then he opened his window. However, before leaving, he scanned the surrounding energies. Aizawa and Yamada were sleeping deeply, so he had a clear field. It was the first time he was going out alone to explore the world a bit, but he was no longer worried at all. He had a place to return to and people who liked him. He took off quickly, his energy surrounding him like a thin cloak, protecting him from the warm summer breeze. He flew as high as he could and contemplated the city below, the millions of lights delivering a blazing and vibrant spectacle of a city that never found rest. He remained silent for several minutes, observing it almost with admiration, but the call of his stomach urged him to move. He flew north for a few minutes, at a rather slow pace, and found a small forest, dozens of kilometers away from the city. He wandered around for about 10 minutes, then spotted prey, a deer quenching its thirst at the watercourse, a moonbeam illuminating the animal with a soft light. He even hesitated to end its existence, but hunger was too strong. He threw a small energy sphere at the animal and ended it in a second. It was painless. Deciding he didn't have time to cook the meat with fire, he used his energy and devoured his prey greedily in a few minutes, watching the water flow. Fortunately, it wasn't a full moon, which he was extremely careful about, so he could enjoy the beauty of the forest a little longer. Satiated, he thought it would be a good idea to explore the country more now that such an opportunity was within reach. He flew off towards Japan's natural beauties, which he knew thanks to the internet, and spent several tens of minutes observing them, finding great calm and great rest. The temples were magnificent, and what about Mount Fuji? He landed at the top of the mountain and could appreciate the city of Tokyo in all its splendor. He would have liked to explore the rest of the world, but it was already late, and he didn't want Mr. Aizawa to worry about him if he woke up to find him missing. It would not be respectful to the man who was taking care of him. The sun was rising in the distance, he noticed, so he decided to return home, smiling, happy to have been able to explore the surroundings. He landed a few hundred meters from his home, calmly surveying his surroundings. After all, he still had a bit of time left. As he turned the corner towards his home, a distant scream brought him to a sudden halt. "No! Help me!" A female voice cried out in horror, the terror palpable in that simple cry. Alarmed, the young man quickly headed towards the source of the noise, arriving in less than a second, leaving a strong gust of wind behind him. He spotted two energies in that alley, one of which radiated immense terror. The scene that unfolded before his eyes shocked him. A woman in her 20s was being forced to the ground, a man attempting to overpower her with his physical strength. It didn't take long to understand what was about to happen, and the young man's eyes widened in disgust. He knew he couldn't act without a license. Aizawa had made that clear one day, saying it was up to the heroes to handle. But there were no heroes here, only him, and this woman in danger. If he did nothing, an image of his family and friends appeared in his mind, compelling him to act, reminding him of what his inaction had already cost him. He had nothing to conceal his face, no outfit, but regardless, he charged forward and pushed the man ahead, trying not to kill him outright. He had underestimated his strength, and the man, built like a wardrobe, was hurled to the ground and skidded about 15 meters before stopping, hitting the wall of a house. His back took the brunt of the damage, and the smell of burning filled his nostrils, making him grimace. The man groaned initially, then screamed in pain, tears streaming from his eyes. Moving as fast as lightning, Gohan rushed towards him, and before the man could even see him, he knocked him out with a quick blow to the neck. He stepped back 2 paces, observing his work. The criminal would survive without serious injury, and although Gohan knew he shouldn't play judge in the streets, he couldn't suppress a small smile. Seeing men like him get punished was a good thing. He knew his father would have acted, all his friends would have acted, and even Piccolo would have ended this repugnant act, because that was what they fought for. Peace and security. The son of Goku turned towards the woman who had stopped sobbing. To say she was relieved was an understatement. She looked at him with wide eyes, and he gave her a small smile, suddenly embarrassed. He approached her, but kept a reasonable distance, not wanting to scare her. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, offering his hand to help her stand. Anyway, she had already seen his face when he had confronted the villain. Running away would have been futile. She grabbed his hand and stood up. "Yes, thanks to you," she finally said, still in shock that a teenager had saved her. She was returning from a night out, and her apartment was only a few blocks away, until that man grabbed her and pulled her into this alley. It all lasted only about 10 seconds before he was thrown to the ground like old trash. She thought a hero would save her, but a child. Gohan released the woman's hand and approached the villain on the ground, picking him up to move him to the side of the road. He coughed, then spoke. "Could you keep what I did a secret?" Quote. She nodded promptly, she owed him that much. "What should I do with the villain?" Quote. He shrugged, watching the sunrise. He needed to get back home quickly. He didn't want to have to explain his nocturnal outing to Aizawa. "I'm not really sure. Maybe you could call the police. That way, he'll be behind bars." She agreed and took out her phone. Gohan decided it was time to leave, and without delay. He stammered a quick series of goodbyes and took off without looking back. He didn't want to attract the attention of any passers-by, so he walked at a brisk pace until he reached the house. He had left his window open, just in case something like this happened. He jumped discreetly inside and entered his room, very pleased with himself. He did not regret acting to save that woman, but he hoped no one would learn what he had done because it was technically forbidden. He wasn't at much risk, but he didn't want to disappoint and break the trust Aizawa had in him. He had welcomed him, offered him a place to sleep, and a chance to fully understand what had happened to him. He had pulled him from his darkness and offered him a kindness he thought he'd never see again while he was still healing in the hospital. For that, he was his hero. Suddenly tired, the half-Saiyan quickly undressed and lay down, knowing the night of sleep would be dreadfully short, but he had already managed much worse than a night in the sack. He fell asleep quickly. 1 week later, Gohan devoured his breakfast in one go, consisting of 2 liters of milk and a box of cereal. It was very light, but it would suffice until mealtime. He was eager to go out with his new friend Mirio. He glanced at the couch and spotted Aizawa sprawled out in full length, having succumbed to the sweet embrace of sleep during last night's movie. An interesting film about All Might in Texas, and boy was it cheesy, but at least it was fun, and it gave Gohan an idea of how the symbol of peace was perceived by the media. Sun quietly got up from his chair, grabbed a piece of paper, and scribbled down where he was going, letting his grumpy hero sleep. Coexistence was going very well. In fact, Shota talked to him about a bit of everything, and they were still getting to know each other. He was a tough man, despite his apparent lethargy, but he was very kind and cared for him. In fact, from a certain point of view, Aizawa resembled his first mentor, Piccolo. Both had many common points, including the austere appearance and their frank language, while deep down, they were very pleasant. Since Mr. Yamada had left 2 days ago, conversations were a bit less lively, which was due to, well, the bubbly character of the radio presenter. Gohan placed the note on the table, then opened the front door, lifting it slightly so it wouldn't creak. He had woken the man once, and the look he received had chilled his blood. He could not make a mistake a second time. Once outside, he headed to the park, where Mirio was waiting for him. They were going to play soccer. There was a small stadium not far away. Then in the early afternoon, they would go to pick someone up. A certain Tamaki Amajiki, the blonde's best friend, and therefore inevitably a jovial person for Gohan. He soon arrived at the spot, dressed in a simple sports outfit he had bought the other day with his legal guardian. He had been uncomfortable with the man buying him clothes and food, but he later swore to repay him in some way. They hadn't found a GI, the outfit the young man preferred to wear, but he would eventually find one. "Hi Mirio!" he exclaimed, joining him in the middle of the stadium, where other teenagers from his friend's school were. Which would presumably soon be his school too. "Hi Gohan. Come on, I'll introduce you to the guys, you'll see, they're really nice." Indeed, Mirio's friends were cheerful people, all polite, and they didn't bother Gohan during their hour of soccer. Perhaps because Gohan had kicked the ball so hard he set the net on fire, then extinguished the flames in less than 2 seconds. Possibly. They had fun like this, and it was a refreshing activity for him, before he saw no one, mainly because he lived in a house away from everything on Mount Paozu, but now he lived in a big city. His great strength and build drew the attention of Mirio's friends, especially when they noticed some scars on his arms. Gohan internally cursed himself for wearing such a tight short-sleeved outfit. He would wear a longer one in the future. He didn't want to draw more attention to himself than necessary. Otherwise, the rest of the morning passed in a pleasant blur, punctuated by Tagata's jokes and ridiculous All Might-style celebrations with every goal. Mirio's imitations were hilarious, and although some mocked him, Sun found it hilarious and encouraged his friend. If he loved All Might, then he had the right to show it to everyone. Once mealtime came, all the friends left, and Mirio and Gohan returned to the park a bit higher up, joking around. Despite their 2-year difference, they got along very well and had several things in common. "Starting this fall, I'm going to start a training program to get into UA." This determination to become a hero worthy of protecting people warmed Gohan's heart, and showed him the kindness, the soul of a hero, the essence of a protector in his friend. He wasn't pretending, being a hero meant a lot to him. He would train so hard to achieve his dreams and protect those who would need his help. This sparked a twinge of guilt in Gohan, knowing that he could easily become a hero with his strength, and that he could surpass all others. So he took a deep breath and gave Tagata a look filled with new determination. "Then, let me train with you, and let's become heroes together." Mirio smiled and placed his hand on his shoulder. Of course. Thus, they promised to become heroes together, to save those who would need it. The foundation of their friendship. They discussed for about 10 minutes, then it was time to head back home, grab a meal, and then pick up Tamaki at his place. He had returned from vacation the day before, if he understood correctly. Sun was looking forward to meeting his friend's best friend. Opening the door, he noticed Aizawa working at the table, a flicker of nervousness in his eyes, which disappeared as soon as the young man entered the house. He questioned him with a look. "It was great, I played soccer with Mirio and his friends. I'm going out this afternoon too." Shota sighed, glad to see him forming bonds with other people. Sun seemed to have a friendly nature but was slightly introverted, perhaps being friends with Mirio would help him socialize. Anyway, for Aizawa, it was complicated to talk about this subject. He only had one friend and wasn't looking to make more. "All right. As long as you return on time, I'm fine with it." By the way, I bought you 5 pizzas, they're in the fridge. Thanks, he replied quietly, opening the fridge and heating the oven. It would be a light meal, like all meals, but it wasn't a big deal, he would go hunting like every night. However, he was very careful about the full moon and hadn't gone out the other day because of it. Losing control and causing harm horrified him. Once he savored his meal, he went back to his room. He had some time to kill before meeting Mirio, so he decided to read. Encyclopedia of different types of quirks. He had borrowed a considerable number of books from the library, where he had already made friends with the manager, a man in his 40s, with graying and unkempt hair, but whose literary knowledge was more than impressive. He was quite kind, and as he appreciated a young man's interest in scholarly literature, Gohan could borrow a bit more books. It was really nice. Thus, he learned a little more about the world around him every day, discovering technical details about the different types of quirks. He was most interested in mutant types because they were out of the ordinary, not that emitter types weren't, but there was a significant visual difference. Since his outing and surprise fight the other week, he had encountered a second villain, a thief who had attacked an elderly man. Gohan had caught up with him after about 10 meters, without using his power, and returned the wallet to the gentleman. In fact, Gohan's helpful and protective nature was already earning him a reputation, of which he was absolutely unaware. What he didn't know was that Aizawa would soon hear about it if he continued like this, but, according to the laws, he hadn't done anything illegal so far. No doubt if he had to defy the law to save people, he would do it. Finishing his reading after an hour, he placed the book on his dresser. Analyzing his room, he had painted the walls in blue and orange, and some of his clothes were purple, Piccolo's favorite color. Having it in his room was like having a part of him nearby. It might have been silly, but it was important to him. He stepped out of the house, only to meet again with the sweltering heat of summer, which he particularly enjoyed. He loved all seasons, but the heavy warmth reminded him of Mount Paozu and swimming with his family, so it was a season he held dear. "Gohan, over here," he heard, then noticed the calming energy of Mirio, shining throughout the area yet soothing. Gohan wondered how his friend could always be so cheerful, but it must be in his very nature. The young Saiyan hoped to one day smile as much as him. He walked with him, and they headed down the avenue, towards the Amakiji household. "I gotta tell you," began Tagata, with an oddly serious tone. "Tamaki is, sometimes a bit pessimistic and shy, but he's really a good guy. You too, I know, but you gotta be kind to him." Quote. Naturally, Gohan nodded. It was clear he would be kind to the other teenager, being mean wasn't in his nature. They eventually arrived in front of the house. Mirio stepped forward and knocked on the door. No one answered, nor made a sound for a good 30 seconds, but the blonde didn't knock again, something Gohan would have done. After a minute, the door weakly opened, allowing Gohan to see who Mirio's famous friend was. The teenager seemed a bit tired, and his back was slightly hunched, indicating a clear lack of physical confidence, which undoubtedly referred to the pessimism. His eyes immediately connected with Mirio, and a brief joy appeared in them. The two must have known each other for a long time. After about 10 seconds, he acknowledged his presence and looked at him with marked curiosity. More than that even, timidity, he seemed almost to back away from the newcomer. "Who's this, Mirio?" Quote. The blonde pulled Gohan towards him, grabbing him by the shoulders and pulling him forward, to the greatest surprise of all three. "This is my new neighbor. His name is Son Gohan. I'm sure you two will get along great." Quote. "Hello," Gohan said more calmly, sending a peaceful wave towards the other boy, who, after gathering his courage for a long time, nodded. "My name is Tamaki Amajiki." "Awesome!" Mirio exclaimed loudly. "How about we take a walk? I can't stay still." Quote. Mirio's boundless energy brought a faint smile to his best friend's face, who quickly put on a pair of shoes before stepping out. The trio of boys casually headed towards Mirio's surprise. The journey didn't last more than 20 minutes, but it was clear that Amajiki wasn't the most talkative, or at least, he thought too much before giving a response. He seemed unsure, but Gohan spotted a determined look in his eyes several times when he focused on Tagata. Sun did his best to make Tamaki comfortable, but each attempt ended in semi-failures. It was evident that it would take time for harmony to develop between him and the brunette. Unperturbed, he continued to converse with Mirio, occasionally trying to include the shy boy. Eventually, they arrived at Mirio's destination. An arcade. "Tada. I brought some of my pocket money so we could all have fun together." Amajiki allowed a small smile to slip onto his features, but it soon faded. "You're too kind, Mirio." The blonde responded with a thumbs up and a bright white smile, classic Tagata. Gohan hadn't known him for long, but his new friend always acted like this, with a big smile and always in a good mood. He would have gotten along very well with Son Goku. After wandering around the arcade for a bit, the blonde pointed to an arcade machine, a gleam of challenge flashing in his deep blue eyes. "You owe me a rematch on this game." Quote. Amajiki resigned himself and joined Mirio, sitting on the fake seat and taking the fake steering wheel in his hands. Gohan stayed a bit behind, trying to understand how video games in the room worked because, if he had to be honest with himself, he knew nothing about them. His life had been entirely focused on combat and studies, and as the years passed, entertainment became less of an option. Now, he just enjoyed discovering so many things and watched with a strategic eye the friendly match between the two, which seemed to have taken place dozens of times before. Contrary to what Goku's son might have bet, the match was fiercely contested, Mirio's reflexes against Tamaki's perfectly mastered technique. It turned out to be particularly intense and exciting, captivating his attention for many minutes. But in the end, it was Amajiki who emerged victorious, with a slight smile. "I got lucky." Mirio leapt from his seat and waved Gohan over, then he turned to his friend. "Nah. You're just really good. Now, let's see how you fare against a new challenger." Quote. Gohan thus took his seat and clumsily grasped the steering wheel, mimicking how Aizawa drove. He took a deep breath in and out, calming his breath and minimizing his energy level. He didn't want to damage the machine. Match 2. Start. Gohan pressed the pedal and accelerated as much as he could, overtaking the lagging ice, leaving him in second position against his now rival, who had a slight lead on him. A glance at the mini-map indicated a tight right turn ahead, so he prepared for it. He took the turn almost perfectly, slightly overtaking his opponent, then continued to follow the track. He quickly noticed Mirio's astonished look as he placed a hand on both seats, playing the commentator's role. He was almost the spitting image of a junior present mic. Encouraged by the commentary, he continued to be guided by his instinct, and he took the next two turns with a certain elegance. However, Tamaki was hot on his heels. "A race is never finished." Tagata commented confidently, "Will a miracle happen, or will the undisputed race champion continue his streak?" Exclamation mark. Quote. Gohan completed the first lap, out of 3, in the first position, with only a half-second lead. Any small mistake, he risked losing the race. He was really enjoying himself, but he continued to focus on the race. The second lap was similar to the first, but the turning point of the race came on the third and final lap. Gohan, to his great surprise, missed the second turn, losing a precious second to his opponent, who missed no turns, giving him no chance. Such was the harsh law of racing. One should not lose focus on the last lap, but regardless, Sun was surprised by Amajiki's mastery, his precision, and concentration. It was just a game, but it meant something nonetheless. Incredible. Our challenger fails at the end of the race, and it's the unbeatable champion who crosses the finish line first. Quote. Match 2. End. Gohan stood up laughing a little. He had spent a quite intense few minutes in this video game, and he hoped to have another match later. Mirio patted him on the back, impressed that he had kept up with the Mega Champion on his first race, while it took Tagata 15 tries to get there. Amajiki seemed almost to melt under the positive comments, and they laughed about it. They then moved on to a second game, this time much more brutal. I like this one, Mirio said as he inserted a coin into the machine. A ball suspended by a metal rod fell right in front of his eyes. Okay, Gohan, the goal is simple. You have to hit the ball as hard as possible, and your score will be evaluated out of 1000. To demonstrate, he stepped back slightly and hit the ball hard. His movement was simple, quick, and efficient, a solid right hook. A series of beeps sounded, and a number in deep red appeared, with an image of a boxer in the background. 819. Bravo. Quote. Not bad, close to my record, he said with a satisfied smile. Alright, Tamaki, your turn. The shy boy stepped forward and looked at the ball despondently for a few seconds before sighing. He stepped back a bit and hit with all his might. It was much weaker than Mirio, but faster. However, his movement was too sloppy. The score climbed up to 499. Not bad. And a crude image of an old man walking with his cane in hand mocked the score. Ah, I knew it, the boy said weakly, stepping back to make way for Gohan. Mirio comforted his best friend but watched Sun's attempt intently, curious to see his real strength. The half-Saiyan eyed the machine apprehensively, knowing he'd have to seriously restrain himself if he didn't want to shatter it into 1,000 pieces. He didn't have the money to reimburse it, and he didn't want to embarrass himself in front of his friends. He breathed calmly, minimizing his energy to the strict minimum, and hit the ball with control. The ball and machine trembled fiercely but ultimately held up. Gohan let out a sigh of contentment, happy to have held back enough, as the number climbed unceasingly. 1000 out of 1000. We have a new champion, the machine declared as epic music played in the background. Wow, that's a lot. Amajiki gasped in surprise, astonished to see Mirio's score toppled before his eyes. The new neighbor seemed incredibly strong, and for the first time, he lingered on his physique, which was strangely muscular for a kid his age. Incredible! Mirio exclaimed, approaching the machine, then glanced at Gohan, still as surprised. You've got to teach me how to hit like you. Sun scratched his neck, embarrassed by the attention as many people stared at the score with wide eyes. Sure, he agreed before turning to fetch the water bottle the blonde had brought with him. After that episode, the magical trio continued their adventures in the arcade for about an hour until Mirio was out of coins, but with a big smile on his face. Conversations and topics flowed easily as the group made their way back to their neighborhood, all happy with the outing. Amajiki was the first to head home, awkwardly waving goodbye to his friends, who one after another returned to their homes. When Gohan closed the door behind him, he glanced at Aizawa, happy. It had been a really good day. What Son didn't know was that really good days were about to become his new norm. To be continued. Chapter 5. 4 years later. It was the shrill sound of his alarm that pulled Son Gohan from the realm of dreams, bringing him back to reality. The young man got up quickly, grabbing the school uniform he had laid out on his desk chair the night before. He would have preferred to sleep longer, but he had a very important day ahead of him. Today, after 4 years in this world, he was going to face the daunting entrance exam for the Hero Academy. Daunting. For others, maybe, but not for him. On the contrary, he was relaxed and very happy to get up this morning. Normally, he was quite grumpy and clumsy upon waking, but he couldn't afford to be at this particular moment. He put on his school clothes, a big smile on his lips, ready for the day ahead. He energetically made his way to the bathroom and splashed some water on his face. A quick glance in the mirror confirmed his lack of sleep. He had spent the whole night reviewing his courses, to be perfectly prepared for the written exam. He ran his hand through his tousled hair, very similar to his father Goku's hairstyle, albeit a bit shorter and thinned out. Proud to resemble Goku, he etched a relaxed smile on his features and left the bathroom. He still hadn't found a way to return home, nor any sign thereof, yet he hoped that his biological father, wherever he might be, would look upon him with pride. He returned to his room and checked that his bag was ready. He just needed to bring a sports outfit for the practical exam and a pen for the written one. Seeing that everything was in order, he headed to the living room. Aizawa was drinking his favorite orange juice, watching TV with disdain. He wasn't in the mood to work today, he just wanted to sleep, and especially, he did not want to teach his too enthusiastic second-year class. He looked at the papers sprawled miserably on the table and sighed. "Hi!" Gohan exclaimed as he entered the room. He rummaged through the cupboard looking for a substantial breakfast, another good reason to get up in the morning. "Did you sleep well?" he asked without turning around. "Not really, I spent my night grading papers," his guardian replied slowly before turning off the TV and turning to him. "And you? I hope you slept well. It's an important day." Gohan poured the cereal into his bowl, smiling, then looked up. Aside from small dark circles, he showed no outward signs of tiredness. "Yes, enough. I'm in shape. I can't wait to get into UA." Shota nodded. He knew his adoptive son would make it, likely setting a points record. He hadn't yet seen Gohan fight seriously, but sometimes, Aizawa joined him during his training, and they sparred in a friendly match. As shocking as it might have seemed the first time, he had lost, and he had the impression the boy was lowering his power. No doubt he would pass with flying colors, and he would be very proud. However, if he did pass, he might end up in his future class. Which wasn't necessarily a good thing. Although Shota was an outstanding professional, teaching his child was not the same as teaching other people's children. Anyway, should that happen, he would treat him like any other teenager, right? As Gohan finished his modest breakfast, Shota reviewed the notes he had corrected the night before. His second-year class would soon be moving on to their final year, and although they all had potential, not all of them liked studying certain subjects, like mathematics. "Gohan, you haven't been giving lessons to your friends, have you?" The boy paused and scratched his neck. "I've tried to get Nijire to study, but I fail every time. I'm sure I'll succeed next time. Mirio is doing well, so we just trained together, that's all. Tamaki, he's too diligent in his lessons to need my help, so to answer your question, no, I haven't given them any lessons." Indeed, 2 years ago, when Mirio and Tamaki were finally admitted to UA, they quickly became friends with a young woman in their class, Nijire Hado. She quickly bonded with the duo, who introduced her to Gohan about a month later. And since then, they formed an inseparable quartet of friends. Hado was a naturally curious and energetic person, and she liked to question Gohan about everything and anything. Their interactions were particularly amusing to watch, as it consisted of massive volleys of questions from Nijire and answers from Gohan. Aizawa looked at him and yawned. "Well, Hado could really use some help. You're probably the only one patient enough to achieve this feat." Gohan nodded, making a mental note to try to get his friend to study for a long time the next day, without moving. Good luck to him. He got up from his seat and sat on the couch, glancing at the time with some anticipation. He still had 15 minutes before walking to the academy. He didn't live far, so leaving too early would condemn him to wait in front of a closed gate with dead-stressed students. He was calm and relaxed, he didn't want that to change. Shota poured a second glass of orange juice and handed it to the boy, his gaze proud. "Give it your all." The half-Saiyan took the glass happily and drank it in one gulp. "Of course, there's no room for complacency at UA," he affirmed, standing up and stretching. He truly meant what he said. He was, by all accounts, the most powerful living being on the planet, but he knew that the hero course was no child's play, because no matter your level, UA would find a way to challenge you. Besides, Piccolo and Goku would have hated for him to behave that way. He would give everything he had to prove his will, the will to be a hero people could rely on. However, he would contain his power so as not to hurt people. He had almost perfect control of his ki, and he was quite confident about that. He wouldn't hurt anyone in a stray blow, but caution is the mother of safety. His monkey tail whipped through the air, savoring the moment. He would have to keep it wrapped around his waist during the exam. It was one of his rare weak points, and he wouldn't want to get hit there. The pain would be hard to bear since the monkey tail is extremely sensitive, as the tail is connected to Gohan's spine. Receiving a blow there could momentarily paralyze him, or even cause him to lose consciousness for a few minutes. Time was ticking, and it was almost time to go. He smiled and nodded at his tutor. The trust and relationship he had built with the man meant a lot to him. He respected him as much as he respected Piccolo. Because when he was in a dark period, Aizawa was there for him. Maybe one day Gohan could tell him his whole story, but he doubted he would. Since he arrived in this world, the young Saiyan hadn't said much to his tutor and friends. Only what he deemed necessary. He had declared that watching the full moon would transform him into a giant ape, and that it was extremely dangerous because he couldn't control his form. Sun also talked about his incredible hunger, and his nocturnal hunting. Aizawa initially reprimanded him, then agreed to let him go out twice a week to stock up on meat for the week, as it was a bodily necessity. He had also given snippets of information about his past to his tutor, but very little regarding the battles he had fought. He had mostly talked about his family and the happy days, and that he wanted to become a hero to save and help people. Gohan, although he had absolute trust in his tutor, had never told him about his true origins. He was too afraid to talk about it, so he preferred to bury his doubts and fears within himself, hoping he would never have to talk about it. Shaking off his thoughts, he went back to his room and grabbed his bag. He went downstairs and opened the door, ready to conquer UA's entrance exam. He could have taken the exam for recommended students thanks to Present Mike and Eraserhead, but he had politely declined the offer. He wanted to take the entrance exam like everyone else, and thus prove that he deserved his place through his own skills. Not that the recommended students didn't deserve their places, but Gohan didn't want to feel privileged. He walked down the road to Tamaki's house, who was waiting for him. The young man nodded at his sight, and then they walked up to reach the house of good old Mirio. They all grouped together towards UA, where they would separate, his friends going to class while he took his practical exam. Gohan wanted to talk with his shy friend, but he knew from experience that he was extremely quiet in the morning, and given the fatigue that a day at UA could represent, he thought it better to let him be a bit. Especially since it was an exam period for Class 2A. Mirio opened the door of his house, proudly wearing his school uniform. "Tamaki, Gohan. It's been since middle school that we haven't gone to class together," he declared, already smiling ear to ear. Mirio in all his glory, he was always happy. From the moment the day began, his smile brightened everyone who had the pleasure of crossing his path. "Yeah. We can do this more often now," Gohan simply replied as they continued on their way. "I'm looking forward to it." Sun liked Tagata because he had always been there, smiling and joking. His presence was soothing, comfortable, but with just his smile and the sparkle in his eyes, he pushed people to excel. Mirio was certainly his closest friend, a man for whom Gohan had deep affection and great respect, almost admiration for his determination. In a way, Mirio was almost like a big brother to him. A few years ago, Gohan and Mirio had sworn to become professional heroes together, and today, Goku's son would join his friend at the academy and keep his promise. He wanted to become a hero to honor the memory of his family, to show the world the good he could bring, but also to keep his promise to Mirio. Tagata had never given up on the idea of becoming a hero. He had never thought of anything else but to help those in need, to comfort those who were hurting. He had the soul of a hero. During their training to enter UA, Gohan had given his friend very complex martial arts lessons, the kind that could force a person to give up. Mirio took all the hits and learned to return them, to improve, so that one day he could be as strong as he so desires. The blonde struck the air with his hand. "It's good that you're in top shape. The entrance exam will be easy for you. Knowing you, you're probably going to finish with the highest score ever achieved." Sun laughed for a moment before finally replying. "I don't know, honestly. I'm pretty confident, but others before me must have scored high." Tamaki joined the conversation. "It's true, but you being you, it wouldn't be surprising if you achieve it." They continued to talk for another 10 minutes before they stopped in front of the train station, waiting for a certain blue-haired young woman. It was 7:20, and they had to arrive before 8 o'clock. They still had time to spare, the academy was just a few minutes' walk away. Suddenly, a small crowd came out of the station, including their friend. She recognized them quickly and waved at them, drawing the attention of some strangers to her, but frankly, she didn't care. Najire Hado was a beautiful young woman, breathtakingly so to most men. Whether it was her figure, her enchanting eyes, their seductive sparkle, or her magnificent blue hair, she embodied what Gohan thought of as elegance. He still remembered the first time he met her, a smile on his lips. She introduced herself in one sentence and questioned him for nearly an hour, barely giving him time to realize his surroundings. He cherished that memory, he cherished her company because she was his friend. Mirio, Tamaki, and Najire were his best friends, people he loved from the bottom of his heart. He couldn't imagine life without them, without their intermingling laughter and passionate discussions. Hado finally joined them, stopping right in front of Tamaki, a curious look on her face. Mirio, Tamaki, Gohan. How are you? Tamaki, what food did you bring for today's exam? Alligator maybe. She started, tilting her head towards the brunette, who tried to answer but never got the chance. She turned to the Saiyan and looked him straight in the eyes. Oh, Gohan, it's the entrance exam today. How many points do you think you'll score? 50. 60. 70. Maybe 80. You're the one who taught Mirio martial arts, too. Do you know what types of robots there will be? Will there be the same one that's worth 0 points? Sun smiled, accustomed to his friend's barrage of questions. He began to methodically answer her queries as he had for years. Well, I don't know how many points I'll score, but I'll do my best. As for the robots, the paper says there'll be several types, including the one worth 0 points. The 4 students soon made their way to UA, the conversation flowing in that short span of time. Mirio made his terrible jokes, Tamaki remained silent unless he had an objection, Najire asked a lot of questions, and as usual, Gohan did his best to answer. Finally, they arrived at the gate. Tagata put his hand on Gohan's shoulder and smiled at him. Good luck with the exam. Not that you need it, you're going to pass with flying colors. Tamaki nodded slowly. Definitely, you're all so strong. Najire sent a big smile Gohan's way. I bet you're going to break the points record. Sun sighed but was quite amused. I don't really want to, and besides, the record must be high. He said, even though he knew perfectly well he could break the point record without much trouble. Mirio laughed. But you're going to do it, record man. The bell rang, signaling it was time for the trio to go. We have to go. Good luck Gohan, said Tamaki, as they quickly headed to their classroom. Now alone, the Saiyan admired the massive building in front of him. He had already observed it from afar, whether waiting for his tutor at the exit or when passing by during his nocturnal escapades. Now, he was about to enter, to prove that he deserved to study in such a prestigious high school. He would then join his friends in Aizawa, work to get his license, and finally, he would save people without having to hide. He would be a man his loved ones could be proud of. Gohan smiled and moved forward, passing the gate with a proud stride. He glanced at the other students, scanning their energies, trying to spot any competent fighters. Noticing no one noteworthy, he continued on, quickly reaching the already open door. He entered and followed the marked path to an impressive amphitheater. The room could accommodate a good number of people, hundreds if one were to judge by the endless rows of seats. Searching for seat 188, he passed by many other aspirants, some emanating quite significant energy sources for young teenagers. There was potential in this vast crowd. Finally seated, a few minutes before President Mike arrived to put on quite the show. Sun knew how enthusiastic the man could be during his speeches, but doubted he would find much success among stressed young people. Fortunately for him, Gohan wouldn't let him embarrass himself. The room eventually filled up completely, presenting a beautiful tableau. Many individuals, dreams, and hopes would soon compete to determine who would have the honor of being trained at UA. No seat was left empty, all occupied by splendid lights made of hopeful dreams. Sun smiled, finding the sight sublime. The thought of young people wanting to become protectors, individuals upon whom society could rely, was comforting. Using their power for good, rather than to inflict harm on others, it was a beautiful thing. President Mike arrived shortly after, taking his place at the desk, facing everyone. He placed a bag, which would certainly serve for his following lessons, then clapped his hands. All eyes turned to him, while some people whispered in surprise at seeing such a recognized pro-hero. "Hello everyone. It's showtime. If you're hype, make some noise," shouted the hero, startling a few students, especially those with better hearing than others. There was silence for the first 2 seconds. Gohan was quite proud of himself. Having spent years around the man, he could now tolerate his shouts. Well, more than at the beginning. He stood up from his chair, determined not to let the awkward silence continue, thus pleasing President Mike. "Yeah," he shouted, a small embarrassed smile on his lips. He surely wouldn't have done such a thing upon his arrival in this world, but he had changed a lot by being friends with Mirio. Yamada struck a grand pose, ecstatic to have received a response. He knew who had answered, and he was very happy about it. "I love seeing that energy. Perfect, my listeners. I'm going to explain everything, are you ready?" "Yeah." Gohan, who had sat down in the meantime, suddenly stood up again, and everyone around him covered their ears. "Yeah." The entire audience remained silent. They were either unaffected by the teacher's fervor or too nervous to respond loudly. Understandable, the man was indeed a bit overwhelming for shy people, but Sun found it refreshing. He wondered why people never responded during his shows. Hizashi quickly introduced the upcoming exam, which turned out to be just as simple as explained in the brochures distributed to the candidates. The exam was always the same, every year, except for a few minor differences. Thus, the young man had drawn his information from the internet and his close ones. The examinees would be separated into different battle zones, where robotic enemies would be located. There were 4 types of fake villains, the 1, 2, 3, and finally the 0.1s. Their power was gradual, but to the great surprise of some students, the most problematic of the fake villains was the one worth 0 points. A slight murmur of confusion spread through the room, and a person raised their hand, asking the question that was bothering them. "May I ask a question?" asked a young man with a rather severe appearance. He was relatively tall for a teenager his age, and his piercing gaze accentuated the impression of seriousness he emitted. "The brochure says there are 4 types of villains. UA cannot afford such an error. If we are here, it's to achieve the best." A brief 2 seconds passed, but before Hizashi could explain the role of this fake villain, Candidate 7111 began to speak again, his tone becoming even sharper. He turned his head to his left and pointed at another student, who seemed uncomfortable. Gohan raised an eyebrow at this unexpected movement. "What's your problem?" Can't you stop mumbling? You're distracting us. If you think this is a game, then leave." Quote. The green-haired boy shrank into himself, dying of shame, while a good part of the auditorium softly laughed. Sun was quite surprised by this gesture. It was quite aggressive and inappropriate to attack another person in this room. He was about to defend his fellow student, but the student turned towards Gohan, with an equally harsh look. "The same goes for you. You made too much noise at the beginning of the presentation and you prevent us from concentrating." Quote. Now, this was too much. Gohan had simply responded to the call of his tutor's best friend, and nothing prohibited it. In addition to attacking a random student, he was now coming after him because he had joined in Mr. Yamada's enthusiasm. Gohan stood up, ready to reply to this man. A few years ago, he would have said nothing or would have apologized for any inconvenience caused, but he was not at fault, and he should not back down to people like him. Even more so if he had unjustly reprimanded the green-haired adolescent. However, just as he opened his mouth, the familiar voice of Present Mike cut off the altercation. "All right. Thanks for the segue." Hizashi resumed his explanation and clarified that in reality, the fourth type represented an overwhelming obstacle. The hero hinted that it was best to avoid confrontation, but he never said it couldn't be defeated despite the danger. All things considered, of course, UA wouldn't let anything serious happen in its exams. The machines were programmed not to mortally wound participants. Yamada finished his explanation with a little quote from Napoleon Bonaparte and the Academy's motto. Plus ultra. 15 minutes later, after a bus ride, all the students were brought to their testing location, in the fake city owned by UA for its tests. Gohan was pleasantly surprised by its size, which he had to admit, was absolutely massive. The Academy's budget must be quite impressive to maintain such a quantity of fake buildings and roads, but the hero Cementos, who worked for the school, probably helped. Aizawa had talked to him about the exam and the different types of robots, as did Mirio, Tamaki, and Nijire, and like a good portion of his competitors, he knew roughly the enemies he would have to face to get the heroic training he so desired. Gathering information was an important thing for anyone wanting to be a hero, Shota had told him. Gohan stretched while sizing up those with whom he would take the exam. There were notably Glasses Man and the green-haired boy. Fate could be amusing when it wanted to be. With an unsure and trembling step, the timid young man moved towards a young woman with brown hair, likely to make conversation. The stern guy coughed and took a step towards the other contestant, but before he could open his big mouth, Gohan blocked his path. He stared hard into his eyes while the other slightly recoiled in shock from his surprise appearance. "Don't you think you've bothered the guy enough? Leave him alone." "But, I think he's going to distract her. He's not serious, and he's going to cause problems," he replied, pushing up his glasses in front of his eyes. Gohan stared at him for a few seconds, his gaze unwavering. He particularly disliked individuals like him, who judge people without knowing them. "I think he's just as serious as you or me, and you don't have the right to assume things about people you don't know." The interlocutor looked at Gohan for a handful of seconds, a clear sense of guilt emerging from his expression. "I apologize, you're right," he finally said, bowing far too much for such a matter. Now it was Gohan's turn to feel uncomfortable. Maybe he was a bit too harsh on him, but he needed to explain his point of view. "It's okay, I'm just glad you understand. Also, my name is Son Gohan." He stood up and kept his back straight, already feeling more at ease. "I apologize for my rudeness, my name is Tenya Iida," he declared, extending his hand to the half-Saiyan. The name seemed familiar to Goku's son, but he couldn't place it. He shook the hand without delay, not wanting to seem impolite to a man who placed so much importance on manners. He controlled his strength to a minimum, trying not to crush his hand. "Strong grip," Tenya simply noted before withdrawing his hand. "Ah, he should have managed his strength better. And we're off," yelled the distant voice of Present Mike, stopping the exchange between the two men. "Good luck to you, Iida," said Gohan before propelling himself towards the city, keeping his speed under control to not create too large a gust of wind, thus disturbing the other participants. As Yamada repeated himself and his competitors entered the city, Gohan was already on a roof, observing the area. There were several alleys ending in dead ends, fairly wide roads, and a central square. Well, since they were machines, he couldn't sense their energies. A slight problem, which he would counter by taking to the heights to spot his targets. After spending about 10 seconds making a mental map of the city, he jumped from the roof and headed straight to the central square, where a good number of robots awaited their extermination. Behind him, many students had ventured into dead ends, in search of opponents. Only a handful made their way to the central square, deeper into the city. Among them was Iida. Without delay, he landed on the central square and spotted several fake villains. He counted 12 points, a good start. Gohan let his ki envelop him like a cloak, surrounding him with its comforting warmth, countering the winter cold. With a simple horizontal motion of his hand, he projected his ki forward, slashing through the fake villains who could not offer any resistance. To his right, emerging from an adjacent street, a new wave came out to reach the central square, and as Gohan had supposed, this place was going to be a zone continuously supplied with points. A good place to stay, rather than getting lost in an alley, where many competitors could end up cornered, not that young Sun could be endangered by such weak opponents. A sphere of ki appeared in his hand, its whiteness illuminating the public square while a handful of competitors had just arrived in search of points. The energy ball left his palm and headed directly towards the fake villains, exploding on contact, making the nearby buildings tremble as if their foundations threatened to collapse. Fortunately, that was not the case, but the students who had arrived just 20 seconds into the race were shocked by the power displayed before their eyes. Tenya stayed in place for a second, admiring such strength, but he had to find his own opponents. Understanding that the square was already too occupied, he dashed to the left, the road teeming with potential points. Gohan smiled seeing him leave. It was smart to leave the area because all the fake villains coming here would be directly eliminated by his hand. A few students tried to compete with Sun on the square, but they didn't score many points. All mechanical waves were eliminated at the root. After 1 minute and 30 seconds, no more fake villains arrived at the square, as if someone had decided to redirect the flow of adversaries to another part of the city. Either way, it didn't bother Gohan much, who had already scored more than 39 points by monopolizing the robotic victims. For now, it was quite fun and easy. He had never had the opportunity to use his ki to protect and control an area because usually, he had to move extremely fast during his vigilante activities. His smile widened once he had finished clearing this place. There was no more reason to stay here. He leapt to a roof and watched for exactly 7 seconds the battle unfolding below. Accustomed to analyzing battlefields in detail to extract advantages, it didn't take him long to spot where he needed to go. 200 meters to the west, there were a good number of robots and relatively few other people hunting them. He then flew towards his points but had to stop on the way when a sight alarmed him. A young woman with purple hair was struggling with an entire horde of machines. There were at least 7 or 8, and she seemed to have difficulty managing them all. However, she was surrounded, and managing a strategic retreat seemed complicated for her. Although a large handful of carcasses littered the ground around her, Gohan could not let her face her opponents alone. True, the robots could not seriously injure a participant, but that did not mean they were harmless. He rushed towards his companion, picked her up, and placed her 10 meters further away. Sun then demolished all the machines in the vicinity with a ki, then turned to her. The young woman seemed to be doing well, a small cut on her hand, but nothing notable. He smiled at her and decided it was good to give her useful information. Hey, they have a hidden button on their heads. If you're surrounded like that, throw yourself at one of them and press it, it'll give you a chance to retreat. She looked at him in surprise but eventually nodded her head. She certainly wouldn't reject useful advice like that. Her headphone jacks moved slightly, seeming to catch a nearby sound. However, she turned towards him. Thank you. He gave her a quick nod and took off, seeking to decimate more adversaries. Although he was quite confident in his point count, which must now be in the 40-50 range, he could not relax. This was only the beginning, and Aizawa had warned him that no matter his ranking in the exam, UA would definitely pose a great challenge to him. And he could not afford to be satisfied and hold back, he wanted to prove his worth. Determined, he finally reached a sort of fake shopping gallery, where villains hurried out of nearby alleys. A column of white ki surrounded Sun, who in just 4 seconds, eliminated the dozen fake villains. He didn't let a single one escape his vigilance, his superpower and heightened senses letting nothing slip by him. The machines were not a challenge for him, and he suspected they were made of papier-mâché, at least those worth 1 and 2 points. The ones worth 3 points were made of a much more resistant material. If Gohan was right, it was certainly graphene, a very light metal and also, if not more, resistant than steel. But it could do nothing against Saiyan's strength. Another wave came from behind him. He could hear the mechanical clicking announcing their presence, attempting to advance towards him. Without even turning around, too busy observing another wave coming from in front, he understood that he was surrounded, but it was not a problem, on the contrary, it was just more points. He extended his right arm in front of him and opened his palm, allowing a sphere of ki to freely form there, its whitish glow casting light as powerfully as the sun at its zenith. The sphere immediately propelled forward, seeking to annihilate the hostile forces in its presence, without however making the buildings around the Saiyan tremble. As the ki was about to make contact with the large group, he let his right arm drop and turned his palm behind him, a smile forming on his features. A new sphere of ki, of pure whiteness, quickly formed there, pulsing in his palm. The group of machines in front of him exploded, creating a cloud of ash and burning carcasses. Then Gohan released his second attack, which headed like a sovereign missile towards the other fake villains. Before a normal person could blink, a second explosion was felt throughout the area, narrowly missing, causing the nearby zone to tremble. Gohan glanced at his work. He was having fun like a child in an amusement park. The machines made a perfect outlet, but he could not just let himself get carried away. He had the duty to control himself perfectly, so that one of his attacks did not create an earthquake that was too significant. He did not know how many points he had just made at that moment, but he had certainly cleared the entire area, as he had cleared the central square 2 minutes earlier. He did not know exactly how much time had passed, but it must be close to 4 or 5 minutes. If he had to guess how many points he had, it would be close to 60, maybe 70. Gohan then decided to take his time and observe the battlefield. Perhaps he could come to the aid of other people, like that girl earlier. Aizawa had said nothing about rescue points, nor had anyone else he had questioned, but it seemed logical that there was a bonus point for those who helped. A hero school had the duty to reward candidates with a chivalrous spirit, for it was the duty of a hero to help his fellow man, even if it played to his disadvantage. Gohan had enough points, maybe he should look for those who needed help now. The idea of someone being injured because he wanted to selfishly destroy more robots repulsed him greatly. Gohan then headed towards the city center, spotting a massive amount of energies there. All seemed to be in relatively good shape, but he noted fluctuations at times. It was normal, the exam required great concentration and very decent endurance to score points. Naturally, many people didn't have the level to meet the Academy's standards. It only took him about 10 seconds to cover the 200 meters, but he took his time to observe the unfolding fights, ready to act. He stopped at the square and surveyed the area. Iida seemed to be wreaking havoc among other aspirants, skillfully smashing the machines. His legs had to be muscular to break the fake villains on their own, even though it took several hits to overcome the Type 3s. About 30 meters from him, a young woman was negating the gravity of the automatons, then letting them fall to the ground. He found himself watching her fight for about 30 seconds. Her combat style was very sloppy, but her power had a lot of potentials. Suddenly, he noticed a candidate a bit further away needing help. He leapt towards him, jumping over the large square where the battles were taking place, then he assessed the situation in front of him. It was complicated to handle for this person, he noted, who was surrounded by a dozen robots, including several three-pointers. He must have launched an assault on an entire wave trying to access the large square. He bit off more than he could chew, apparently. He focused on his comrade, a boy, short in stature, no taller than 1.40 meters, whose hair resembled bunches of grapes. Same color, same shape. He was holding what Gohan understood to be his hair in his hands, and he was vulgarly swinging it towards the machines, aiming at the ground. In fact, he was using it to knock the machines down, so they would break under their own weight, which was in itself a good idea, but Great Boy couldn't manage the masses as easily with this tactic. And as Gohan had noticed from afar as he headed towards him, a machine fired its burning ray towards the boy. It was time to act and save him from a sneaky injury. Sun landed behind his comrade, who turned alarmed by the sound of the ray. Then with a quick motion, he swept the ray aside with the back of his hand, sending it towards the stratosphere without ceremony. Taking advantage of having his hand extended, he charged an energy attack and sent it directly at a group of 3 fake villains clustered together. They couldn't withstand the impact and instantly burned, the eyes of the saved candidate widening, a mix of admiration and fear shining in them. However, there were still a good number left waiting to be defeated, but, strangely, the numerous sticky balls of the Great Boy eliminated a good part of them. The jet black eyes of Gohan emitted a slight surprise, not thinking the machines would all fall into this trap, but they did. Well, began Gohan, observing the machines struggling, stuck to the ground by the sticky balls. He looked straight into the boy's eyes and gave him a big smile. "You've eliminated quite a few, huh?" Quote. Totally yeah. My balls stick well today," he said with a satisfied smile, his tone almost boastful. Sun noticed someone in trouble a bit further up the road. He nodded at them and then flew off. Good luck. The next 3 minutes resembled pure rescue work. similar to what he could do during his nights as a vigilante. However, he could exchange a few words with people and give them tips to improve their attacks. It was enjoyable, and he savored every moment of helping people because if he had one regret about acting as a vigilante, it was having to hide. As he had just lent a hand to a young woman with orange hair, the earth began to tremble, buildings followed suit, and then a piercing screech was heard, chilling to the bone. A huge machine, towering over skyscrapers, emerged from the ground and even obscured the sun with its grandeur, causing a major wave of panic among the adolescents intimidated by the brute force the android emitted. For anyone without powerful abilities, it was like being up against a wall they couldn't scale. However, for Gohan, it was nothing more than a trifle he could annihilate with a weary gesture of his hand, without even paying much attention to it. Compared to Frieza or Cell, this pile of metal didn't cause him any fear, just a tired little smile. Yet, one thing was clear to him: the need to rescue those who couldn't fight. His fellow examinees were fleeing towards the entrance of the city, where they would be safe, but not everyone was close enough. Gohan had to ensure the safety of those who couldn't fight. He extended his senses, scanning every energy in the vicinity, and he spotted 7 that were lagging. Activating his ki, he flew towards these people, frightened of being injured by the 0-point type. He grabbed all 7, carrying them under his arms and on his back, without feeling any major discomfort. Having no more space, he carried the last one with his tail, and in just 20 seconds, he reached the entrance and released them. They thanked him and took shelter as Gohan watched the advance of the colossal automaton. He could have brought these people back much faster, but he didn't want to subject their bodies to too high a speed. While Gohan was preparing his signature move, the Kamehameha, with his hands positioned in front of his chest, he noticed someone charging bravely at the enemy. He watched for a couple of seconds, shocked that anyone would dare to attack the monster. But then he saw her. He noticed the brown-haired young woman who manipulated gravity, trapped under a pile of debris as the 0-point type slowly but surely approached her position. He understood why the green-haired guy had leapt. It was a desperate act to protect someone in need. Letting his power flow within him, Gohan dashed towards his fellow examinee, ready to assist. But before he could cover half of the 60 meters separating them, he witnessed the overpowering punch decapitate the machine. The scene was magnificent, and the displayed power left Gohan breathless. Such raw, unrefined power, he hadn't seen anything like it in years. However, the consequences of such power seemed excessive. The adolescent's legs were broken, their purplish color making Gohan wince. The same was true for the arm that delivered the punch. He had given his entire body and soul for a single attack, to save someone in need. As he fell to the ground, unable to slow his potentially fatal descent, Gohan shouted and caught him mid-fall, careful not to touch any broken limbs. He knew the type of pain, and it was indescribable. He gently landed, lowering slowly so that the chilling February wind wouldn't cause the boy more harm. The boy looked straight into Gohan's eyes, shocked by his sudden appearance. "Thank you," he said with more strength than Sun would have initially guessed. "It's nothing. You can't move right now, so I'm going to put you down gently, okay? You'll need to wait for medical attention." The boy's expression turned into one of shocking distress, alarming the Saiyan who held him in his arms. No. I need to score at least one. That's where the problem stemmed from. Sun realized that the young man could only use his power at the cost of serious injuries, and he couldn't regulate it at all. It was extremely serious. If he continued to fight like this, there wouldn't be much left of his body after each battle. "Calm down," he said in a reassuring tone, putting on his best Goku-style smile. "Don't worry, a hero academy will never turn away someone who sacrifices themselves to save someone in need." He let the words sink into his brain and gently placed him on the ground, trying not to cause him pain, but it was in vain. He winced and moaned in pain as his body touched the still cold ground. He seemed to understand that struggling was futile, and he couldn't do anything in his current state, but tears of despair started to stream down his cheeks. Gohan felt very bad for his fellow examinee, such a feeling of weakness, the inability to act when it was needed most, he felt it hit him full force. "And that's it," Yamada shouted joyfully, causing even more pain to the adolescent lying on the ground, his body broken. "Hey," said a female voice a little further away. It was the girl who was trapped under the rubble. "That was amazing, Midoriya," she said to the injured, trying to provide him as much comfort as she could. Gohan approached her and smiled. "I'm going to get you out of the rubble, are you hurt?" Quote, "Yes, my feet." "Fine," he said, lifting each piece of stone with care. He did so gently, not wanting to worsen a possibly significant injury to the ankle. In less than a minute, he had cleared all the debris that pinned her down, and seeing that her ankle was indeed broken, he lifted her from the ground and placed her next to her rescuer. The other candidates who had watched the entire scene were shocked by the power of the boy with green hair, and also by Gohan's swift rescue. Tenya looked at the trio in front of him with great shame. He had misjudged the shy boy, who had seen through the true nature of the exam, while he had not. "Excuse me," declared a calm, elderly woman's voice. It was the nurse, recovery girl. Gohan watched the woman tend to those in need, and before he even had time to catch his breath, she came over to them and slightly opened her eyes when she saw the state of Green Boy. Since she did not know his name, she referred to him by the color of his hair. "Ah, my boy, let me take care of this," she said before leaning forward and kissing him on the cheek. The brunette girl's eyes widened in surprise, as did Gohan's, who watched the old woman at work. Aizawa had told him that UA's nurse was sometimes unreasonable, but coming from his tutor. In a split second, Green Boy's broken limbs were healed, still red and requiring quite some time to rest, certainly, but he could walk. This woman was like a senzu bean at hand, it was incredible. But there was a drawback, as the young man collapsed from exhaustion, into a deep sleep from which he seemed far from waking. Putting two and two together, he understood that this power was not as potent as a senzu bean, but it was still quite handy. Once she had finished healing the boy, she headed towards the girl. Gohan waved at her and decided to leave. Nothing was keeping him there, and he was keen on spending his pocket money at the nearest restaurant. He felt in the mood to celebrate but didn't want to stuff himself alone, even though he was very hungry after using his power. He wasn't tired, but the last 10 minutes had been more intense than he had originally thought, and so it had whetted his appetite. He wasn't sure how many points he had gathered, but it must have been a more than decent score. He would even be surprised if he wasn't in the top 3 students this year. He went home with a big smile, ready to raid his fridge. Observation room. "Well, we have here a fine selection of future great heroes," exclaimed a mouse, no, a bear, or perhaps a dog. A mix of the three, surely. No one dared to ask, so no one knew. A tall, muscular man wearing a red suit nodded. "You're right, Mr. Nezu. We have a lot of potential here." I even think we have a new record holder for the highest score in the exam, declared the man with a chuckle. Aizawa, sitting in his seat, took a sip of orange juice, an honest smile on his face. Indeed, Gohan did very well, but I expected nothing less from him. Yamada laughed beside him and watched the replays of Gohan, where the different teachers could review the young man's actions. Aizawa sighed, noticing the surprised, even shocked looks of some colleagues. Shota knew his adoptive son had absolutely massive potential, but he hadn't yet had the chance to see him fight properly. He expected it, and he was very proud to see that the boy's training had borne fruit. Now, the question is which class he'll be in. Yamada joked, raising an eyebrow towards his old friend. We might even see a Dadzawa in action at UA, ahahaha. As Shota used his scarf to silence his old friend, the man sitting next to him coughed, drawing everyone's attention. Toshinori Yagi, aka All Might, the new homeroom teacher for the first years. Indeed, your boy is extraordinary, Aizawa. He scored so many points, we have to count them, but I wouldn't be surprised if my record fell, he admitted seriously, stopping Khan's laughter. Khan looked directly into the eyes of the symbol of peace. Sure, the teenager had done well, admirably well in this exam, but to beat the record considered unbeatable. Are you sure? Quote. Nezu spoke up. Yes, I do believe so. That's going to be too big news for today. 2. Repeated Shota, feeling a chill run through him. The principal smiled and chirped, well, we needed a teacher for the second years since you will be taking care of Class 1A next year, Aizawa. So, I decided to hire another teacher for the coming years. She should be arriving soon, he finished, chuckling into his fur. A new teacher? The faculty asked in chorus. Yes. And that person is... Before the mouse dog bear could finish his sentence, the door opened, and a bit more light streamed into the room. The ray of sunlight eventually dazzled good old Shota, but his vision quickly stabilized, and a vision of horror appeared before his weary eyes. It couldn't be real, no, his heart couldn't take it. Hello everyone! Exclaimed a familiar voice. Yamada jumped from his seat and patted his old friend on the shoulder before turning to the other teachers. When Nezu asked me for a recommendation, I introduced him to Emi Fukukado, aka Miss Joke. Oh god, no. Aizawa thought with all the despair he could muster. Maybe she would eventually get him to marry her just from having to see her smiling face all day long. 7 days later, at the Aizawa household. Gohan was in his garden, legs crossed, meditating quietly, as was his routine. It was necessary to meditate every day to be rested and relaxed, and today, it was especially so. The results would arrive at the same time as his tutor would return later in the morning. The past 7 days had been calm for young Sun, who took the opportunity to train and stop some crimes in the city, nothing notable, though. Aizawa wasn't often at home, and the two men barely had time to cross paths, for when one returned, the other had just fallen asleep or went off to hunt and then to his duties as a vigilante. Gohan was quite confident in his success. He was almost certain he would be at the top, as Piccolo or his father would have expected. It was normal, with his abilities. So, he hadn't really panicked. A few wandering thoughts had made him doubt at times, but there was no reason to remain so for long. Finishing his meditation, the young man got up and calmly stretched for the next 5 minutes, as muscle cramps were not pleasant. He quickly went into the house and grabbed a bottle of water, then sat on the couch and fixed his eyes on the front door. It was nearly time. And as expected, after about 15 minutes of listening to the uninteresting radio program, the door opened. Shota entered, looking tired even after just a short morning of work. His night must have been short, as was almost always the case with him. He held in his hand a letter, sealed with the UA emblem. There was no doubt about it, those were his results. "Good morning, Gohan. I have your results," the man said before yawning, then handing him the paper. He already knew the results, as all the teachers who had to watch the footage several times to accurately count the points. "Finally, I was eager to see," he said, taking the paper in his left hand. He looked at it for a few seconds then opened it directly. He wanted his tutor to be there to see the results, but the man surely knew them already. There was only a single small paper, indicating which class he would be in next year, and other details he would check later. It meant he had passed the test, but he found a small spherical device in the letter. A hologram, he realized. He placed it on the table and pressed it, waiting for the image to appear before his eyes. A second later, a blue screen emerged from the spherical base, before a very recognizable man entered the camera frame. Before the sound even started, Gohan turned to Shota, a look half surprised and half delighted. "All Might," he whispered, turning his attention back to the image. "Hello, young son. I'm here to deliver your score as the new teacher at UA. I must say you have done admirably well. Regarding the written exam, you are student number 1 among those who took the standard test, but a student admitted by recommendation has surpassed you by 1 place at this level. Congratulations." Gohan allowed himself a smile. He enjoyed studying and learning everything he could, and so learning from the best hero in action would allow him to become an excellent hero himself. He was so excited to enter UA and meet the man in person. But you know that's not enough to make a hero, you also need to be good in practice. You've set a new record for the exams, higher than mine. Sun raised an eyebrow then turned to his tutor, who was smiling at him. He was glad to have made the man proud, and also to have proven that he deserved his place at an institution as prestigious as UA. The Saiyan's smile widened even further as he continued to listen to All Might. "You have a total of 154 points. 90 villain points, and 64 rescue points. An incredible score, young son. I look forward to teaching you next year. Remember, despite your excellent score, you should not be satisfied with it. But I have no fears. Welcome to UA." Gohan got up from the couch and looked at Aizawa, who was still standing, having watched the hologram of All Might give him his results with a certain pride. His small smile and that proud glint in his usually stern eyes confirmed Gohan's thoughts. Aizawa was like Piccolo in many ways, which was one reason why Gohan respected the man so much. The young man walked towards him and embraced him. He had made the man who had given him so much proud, the man who inspired him to become a hero just like Goku. Aizawa was slightly surprised but returned the gesture with a bit of stiffness, as he wasn't very comfortable with physical contact. The hug lasted a brief minute, then Gohan stepped back, still smiling. He didn't say a word, everything was conveyed in his gaze. He was very happy and felt a rather rare emotion rising within him. The pride of having been accepted to be a hero. He was going to meet his tutor, Mirio, and all his friends, plus All Might. He was going to learn and live a dream he had cherished since he arrived in this world. "I'm proud of you," declared Shota, breaking the silence. He remembered the injured, lost, and traumatized young man from a few years ago. He remembered the pain in his soul, the loneliness that threatened to haunt him for life. He couldn't be happier to have taken him under his wing. He was proud of the path he had taken to become a young man with a hero's heart. Gohan lifted his head, his eyes shining. "I'll be a hero you can be even prouder of. I have no doubt," added the man, smiling. He was in a very good mood, and seeing the boy smile and grow was heartwarming. "You can invite your friends to celebrate your entry into UA." The Saiyan laughed. It was unexpected, but he was certainly going to take up the offer. "Thank you." Quote. The boy took his mobile phone out of his pocket, his smile widening even more than was humanly possible, but then again, Gohan was a Saiyan. It was an excellent day. One that he would never forget, and he was happy to have been able to live it. To be continued.
Unfortunately, this part is over. I hope you enjoyed it. Apologies for all those quotes, exclamation marks, question marks and mispronunciations. Please have a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night. See you next time, my dear faves.